We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Mantry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We have yet another packed show on our topic list coming up. We'll see.
We are not going 2.5 hours today. I have stuff to do.
So we will see how many questions we're able to get to. We've got plenty to get to if we're able to. And then
news.
There is news, and I
only care about my news.
There is a surprise. There's news from Tom, not from any particular company. So I don't know. I mean, as soon as we talk about what we watched, it's going to become apparent how Tom watched what he watched in the fashion that he watched it. So
we're going to have to address that.
That's right.
Go. All you people, and we're going to talk about them in a second here.
Okay.
In fact, you know what? Let's do what you watched, then we'll do listeners of the week, and then we'll do what I watched.
Okay. We'll tease it out a little bit.
We'll tease it a little bit.
Sounds good. We didn't discuss any of this beforehand, as you
We did not discuss it. This is on the fly. Oh my God, I have to blow my nose.
Okay.
Okay. What did you watch, Rob?
Okay, so I watched one movie this week, which was the newly updated 2024 version of Mean Girls, which is based on the Broadway musical that was based on the 2004 movie. So,
right.
That's sort of the order of things. Mean Girls, the 2024 movie version based on the Broadway musical, is not good. It is a prime example of some movies need to be longer. There is such a thing as saying this is the running time that we are going for. We're going to be very strict about it. And this results in chopping so much out that you lose the point of the story, which is what happened with this adaptation. Because they kept the running time to just barely over 90 minutes, it means that it's actually shorter than the original movie. So obviously stuff would have had to been cut for that. And then it means they had to cut out like half of the songs from the Broadway musical. And of course, when you adapt a story to a musical, a bunch of what's going on with the characters emotionally is what they sing about. So when you cut half of those songs out, you miss what's going on emotionally with half of the characters.
Why would you want to know any emotional things that are happening in a movie? You just need plot point. Plot point 1, plot point 2, plot point 3. Make sure you hit them. That's what makes all the really good Marvel movies is the one where it's fight scene, and nobody talks about. You know what? If you really want to see a perfect example of this, and no shade to any of the actors on this, is The Mummy 4.
Okay.
The one with Jet Li. There's literally no character development throughout the entire movie. It is just plot point until you get to the end, and then it's big fight scene, and that's the end.
Sure.
And you're like, couldn't care less about any of these people anymore. How is it possible that you made me not care about Brendan Fraser?
Sure.
Go on.
So, I mean, less than that, nobody has an arc in this movie because they decided that as soon as you meet these characters, we're going to skip right to where they end up at the end of the original movie.
Sure.
That's how they're going to be introduced, which means that the movie Mean Girls 2024 doesn't have any mean girls. It has a single mean girl, which is, the art best friend that Katie meets at the very beginning, Lizzie Kaplan's character in the original movie. And the whole point of which was discovering by the end of the movie that she is actually a mean girl. That was like the main point of the movie. It's very problematic when she just instantly wants revenge on people who aren't actually very mean at all. So yeah, tremendous problems with this movie. It had every opportunity because this is 20 years later, updating it for... I mean, I've seen people calling it Gen Z, but that's way too... I mean, it's Gen Alpha at this point. That's who it should be in 2024. Is that what we're on?
Is it go X, then Millennials, then Z, then Alpha? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
This is a dumb naming convention. We got to come up with something better than this.
The Gen Alphas are in high school now. That's who this should be about.
Yeah, for sure.
The producers were talking about how, they monitored a lot of Instagram and TikTok and stuff and tried to make sure that people were dressing that way, which means the plastics aren't plastic. They don't wear high heels. Everybody looks very comfortable because that's the way people are dressing these days. Like, they they lost so much of the point of everything. You're not supposed to like everybody instantly. You're supposed to grow to like characters you don't like at first and come to discover that people that you're on their side at the beginning actually have faults. That's a character arc. Nobody has one in this movie. It's a complete failure of an adaptation. Tina Fey is in this movie. They credit her as having written the book meaning the stage play dialogue, which is translated over but cut to shreds. She is the most checked out of any performance I've ever seen Tina Fey in, almost as though she saw the script and went, I guess I'm contractually obligated to be in this thing, but I don't want to be here. Right. Tim Meadows is also still in it, reprising or redoing his role, because it's not like this is a sequel or anything. It's a retelling of the original. And he is also just completely without any energy, which is ridiculous for Tim Meadows, because that's his whole thing. Not the cinematography, the shot composition is the most boring shot composition I've ever. They just stick a camera with a 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, which means, oh my goodness, did I feel bad for the background dancers and all of the performers, because you don't see them. You see the main character dead center in the screen, the most boring framing you could possibly imagine, 90-degree perpendicular facing forward. You see the performer to their left, you see the performer to their right, and you see nothing else. And the background people, I don't know if they were brought over from the Broadway musical or if they're all new cast or whatever, but they are giving it their all. You just can't see them. It's like, this is an example of where I would have much preferred a wider aspect ratio so I could see some of the dancing going on around and behind the principal performer at any given moment. There's one song I kind of remember and enjoyed. The rest were extremely forgettable and chopped to shreds versus their Broadway versions just to bring the time down. So yeah, don't waste your time on this. Watch the original Mean Girls, find a video capture version of the Broadway musical, because both of those are very enjoyable. I don't know what they were thinking with this. It's a horrible adaptation.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So
what else?
That was that. Unfortunately, what I watched. Then I watched something I enjoyed very, very much, which is the first 2 episodes. That's all that's available as of the time we're recording this, of X-Men 97. This is on Disney Plus, and this is going right back to basically 1 year after the finale of that original X-Men animated series from the 90s.
Okay, how old? Don't tell me how. You don't have to tell me how old you are if you don't want to. But what decade are you in of your life?
I was born in 1981. So
okay, so you're literally 10 years exactly. Well, not to the
younger
day,
than you.
But to the year younger than me. I love comics. I love cartoons. I watched them all the way through. I still watch them. Let's be honest. I still watch all that stuff. Somehow, X-Men 97 or the X-Men
animated series. Yep,
animated
ran
series.
for 5 series.
I just never. It never clicked with me. I never got it.
Well, I mean, it ended in 1996, so that means I was the perfect age.
I was in high school. I was finishing up high school at that point.
Yeah, I was the perfect age. I was exactly the target demo, and I loved that original series. It is what more or less introduced me to the X-Men. Back when I was that age, I had heard of Wolverine. That was about it. I really didn't know. I didn't know Rogue. I didn't know Gambit. I didn't know any of those characters, really. So this was my introduction to the X-Men. Many people are fans and very nostalgic of that original X-Men animated series.
Are.
We can absolutely go back and watch it now and be like, yep, the budget was very constrained. They're animating on the 4s very often. The final season where they switched animation studios is god-awful. But X-Men 97 is exactly what anyone who was a fan of the original animated series wants. It looks similar enough that you're like, yep, that's the same characters, but everything is clean.
I've seen the ads for it, and you're right. It looks exactly the same. I wasn't finishing high school. I was finishing college. Go on.
It's cleaned up. It's widescreen aspect ratio, so it looks cinematic. It's HDR. It's certainly not animated. In fact, they talked a bit about the animation where they animate individual characters at different frame rates. They have enough budget that they can do that to make sure that people who are supposed to be really smooth and fluid and fast can be so, and people who are supposed to be a little bit clunky clunkier, are like animated on 3s or animated on 4s to make them more stilted. They're doing that type of different frame rates for people. The updated theme, because everybody, of course, loved the original X-Men animated series theme song. Updated version of it, I'm like, it's so dangerous. Like, are you going to completely change and do something all new? Are you going to use exactly the same audio from the original, or are you going to try to update it and potentially piss everybody off? They did a good enough job that I'm like, oh yay, as soon as you hear those original opening chords, it's like, yes, I am in. But the storytelling in this, they are adapting a couple of very popular story runs when Magneto becomes leader of the X-Men, and when Madeline Pryor shows up. So those are the stories that they're adapting, similar to how they did with the original animated series, condensing stuff, changing some stuff around, but doing it in a really respectful and really well-edited way. So, I mean, I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but people who have seen the 3rd episode and that are like, yep, it keeps on going. It stays at this level. So, yeah, I enjoyed that tremendously. If you never saw the original X-Men animated series, of course, you're going to not get every single reference back to that original series and stuff like that, but this is totally watchable. If there's a slight criticism, it's like, yes, there is some clunky exposition dialogue in that first episode to catch you up on what people's powers are and what the relationships are between them, which if you just finished watching the original animated series, you're gonna be like, I don't need this to all be retold to me, but it is so that someone coming into X-Men 97 brand new will not be completely lost and will have some explanation. Fair enough. This is a half-hour show where we've got to get this stuff out of the way quickly, and they do, and I absolutely loved it. And Cyclops is back to being cool, and hooray.
Cyclops is not cool. I
liked him in that
I do not get the Cyclops love. I mean, he's I liked Havoc better than Cyclops in the comics. Yes. Cyclops in the comics is just, whatever.
He's honorable. He stands up for what
Professor
he believes
X
in.
eventually.
Well, we're not there at that point yet. And they finally in X-Men 97 have his optic blast being concussive, meaning that he can move himself with his optic blast, which he never did in the original animated series, even though that was a thing in the comics, which once again proves that his actual mutant ability is his incredible neck muscles, because all of the force would be applied to his neck if that is where the source of the pushing came from. And if he can stop himself from falling out of an airplane with an optic blast, it means his neck muscles are incredible.
He's just steel. It's like adamantium neck muscles.
It must be. All right. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'm
all right. We will not talk about what I watched yet because of
surprises.
What's going to happen in a second. So let's talk about the listeners of the week and get the podcast started. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to the website. Find the show notes, the Flickr albums, follow along with the pictures, as well as older episodes. All the audio is linked up there, too. So if you're like, I don't want to have to go find a podcast streamer thing, then yes, you can find us there. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. Contact us directly. Rob at avrant.com is socials is at First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. Mm-hmm. All right. I want to thank our listeners of the week. Become a listener of the week to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to the website, avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sending us a PayPal donation with your PayPal account or with your credit card. We don't have any access to any of that, so we just see the money, which most of it comes to us. A little bit, I guess, goes to you. I'm not, or them, or I don't know how it works.
Yep.
Maybe they charge you extra. I don't know.
No, PayPal keeps some.
Yeah. Anyways, so this week we had Anand, who did that. So thank you very much, Anand.
Thank you, Anand. That is very nice of you to send a donation to us via PayPal. We appreciate it.
We do appreciate it. I especially appreciate it because that
pays for the back-end expenses.
There's a lot of back-end expenses going
on.
There are. We also have our Patreon account, patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to be a monthly contributor to the podcast. Every week they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. We have 133 patrons right now, including Kris. Kris says he examined how much he actually uses all of his streaming services he was subscribed to, and it turns out that he uses AVRant more than Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Which is not a subscription service. So I guess Patreon is. The Patreon part of it is.
That's right.
So he canceled a couple of subscriptions and bumped up his monthly Patreon pledge to us instead. Thank you very much.
That is so nice.
We appreciate you, Kris.
Thank you, Kris. And thank you also to the 132 other paying Patreon members over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. Big thank you to everybody who supports us financially.
So, if you can't support us financially, what can you do? You can do something else, and then either we'll mention you here because we know about it, or you'll tell us about it, and we'll mention it here because then we'll know about it. So, Aaron, for another week, It's another week, so another movie code for Rob to check, and Rob can report back. Warner Brothers seems to be the only studio that's actually strict about the expiration dates on their printed pamphlets. So everybody else, that expiration date is a mere suggestion. Nobody is actually... They're hoping that you throw it away after the expiration date, but really it still works. But not Warner Brothers, because Zaslav is a... Can't say it on this podcast because we're supposed to be clean.
Why we provide this service. Can confirm for you those 3 WB movie codes, which I wouldn't have mind adding to my collection, but they expired back in 2020 and 2021, respectively, and they don't work. It says this offer has expired. Nobody else seems to do that, but thank you, Warner Brothers. And Aaron, thank you for sending the code all the same.
I got an offer from our listener Greg to send me a Fosse ZA3 amp. What is that one? I don't know what that one is.
Oh, that's a little bit higher end. That's some pretty decent power going on in that thing.
Does it have a volume knob?
Course. It's got a volume knob on the front. Okay. It does, yes.
Anyways, he offered to send it to me. I accepted, and it's supposed to arrive sometime today. So you will know when it arrives because we are absolutely positive it's going to arrive during the recording of the podcast.
That's just the way things work when we record the podcast. But yeah, that's a very nice offer from Greg. I guess he wasn't using that amplifier. And
he said he had a couple that he wasn't using. So right. Yeah, what probably happened is we were like, I mean, I'm guessing here, is we were like, I bet you don't need them. Or he listened to the podcast and goes, I bet I don't need these. Right. Went back to using his receiver and went, oh, God.
Something.
I don't need these. I'll just keep them around. So I still have the Fosse amp that I showed off last week in the box. Never took it out. Never opened it. Yeah, so I'm going to bring... once I get this other amp and verify that it works,
yes,
we will mention Greg again next week if it works. If not, then we will mention him that it didn't work. We'll see what happens from that. But I will send the other Fosse back, so that will make my wife happy because... We've had a lot of...
is $60.
Unexpected expenditures.
Yes.
Yes, we'll talk about that in a second. Ryan sent an Movies Anywhere code to whom?
Well, I mean, to question at AVRant, so I will have to forward that to Tom's email that he actually checks because I can't use a Movies Anywhere code up here in Canada.
I will check it for you, Ryan, because I'm a nice guy.
That's right.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Jay, Aaron, Dan, Eddie, Dazz. And this is why we are pausing my reporting of what I was watching. Okay. Dazz wants me to get an 83-inch OLED rather than a 77-inch. When I move to a house, when I go shop housing in 5 years or so, I'll be swayed to choose a house with a room that will work with the larger TV size, even if that's subconscious. I think what will actually happen is I will choose a house, and then if no matter what size TV I have, I will make sure it works no matter what.
I mean, as long as it fits through the door.
If I have to take Dramamine, I will do it.
That's right.
Nathan, who also agrees that I should get an 83-inch, he enjoyed our discussion about it last week, and since I already have a wide couch for my seating, the slightly wider TV will better accommodate more viewers. As if I want anybody else in this room, I'm surprised that you think that I'm enjoying other people being here. I definitely put a lock on the door for a reason. Robert, Stan, Brian, who says listening to us has saved him money. John, who says he's learned so much over the years and passed along our knowledge to many others. And Ryan. So let's do those names again. Okay. Jay, Aaron, Dan, Eddie, Dazz, Nathan, Robert, Stan, Brian, John, and Ryan. Thank you very much for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. I'll say the names one more time so they came from my lips. Jay, Aaron, Dan, Eddie, Dazz, Nathan, Robert, Stan, Brian, John, and Ryan. Thank you so much for those notes of gratitude and encouragement. We very much appreciate it. John, I'm sure that you let all those people who you forwarded our knowledge along that came straight from you. There was no influence of us behind it. That's the way to take credit.
So, what did I end up choosing for my TV?
Here we go.
Is the question that is on everybody's mind. What TV did I actually go with? Did I go with one of the LGs, the 83 or the 77? Both the C3s were recommended to me.
They were.
And then the S90? Whatever.
S89C specifically, which only comes as a 77-inch.
You can tell which one I definitely didn't buy because I don't know the number of it, right? So there's a Samsung one, right? The 77-inch. Did not get the Samsung. Okay, so we know that already.
Yes.
Also, did not get either of the other two.
That's right.
That's right. And you're like, oh, what has he done?
Did he go buy the world? Has entered.
A new competitor has, and from the. Okay, I can't do the announcer guy.
Was it that you wanted an MLA and the 83-inch size so much that you got a G4, which isn't really even available yet, but is listed on some websites now?
Yeah, could be, but I didn't do that. What I did do is, as we were shopping, Rob and I, for TVs, I said, hey, and you heard me say it on the podcast last week, there's a C2 on here for $3,000. And Rob said, that must be renewed.
I was thinking so, because up till this point, the C2s from 2022, of course, have actually been more expensive than the C3s that are currently on clearance.
Odd.
It is.
So after the podcast, Rob and I sat down and looked at it and looked at it and looked at it. And in fact, it is not renewed. It's a brand new C2 TV.
This was being shipped by and sold directly by Amazon.com. It was not a third-party seller. Amazon.com will definitely indicate if it is renewed or refurbished when they're selling it themselves. There was nothing about that. It was brand new and $3,000.
It also said that free returns and free exchanges if you have a problem.
Yep.
So I told my wife and I told you guys that I wanted to buy local. I wanted to buy Best Buy. And Sam's has the C3s Sam's Club has the C3s for the prices that we've discussed.
$3,500 for the 83-inch or so and $2,300 for the 77-inch.
So when I was looking at this, I was like, man, I mean, $500 is a pretty massive savings. What am I going to lose if I get the C2?
Okay.
What am I going to lose? And Rob says it will not do DTS decoding. So I had thought I was going to have to plug everything into my TV and then eARC it back to my receiver because I wasn't, I didn't think the receiver was recent enough of passing through all this stuff. And in truth, it is not. It is not capable enough to pass through all of the
Tom
things.
does own an Xbox Series X, and there are some things that your X4400H will not pass through from an Xbox Series X.
4300H.
43, I make that mistake every time.
Every time. So the 4300H will not do it. You know what else it doesn't do? eARC.
That's right.
So my original plan of plugging everything into the TV and then sending it back via eARC so I could get everything through wasn't going to work anyways. So then we started looking, and by we, of course, I mean Rob, because I am ultimately lazy and Rob likes the stuff, likes to do all the dirty,
I must know.
stuff.
It bothers me if I don't know.
He does, and I use his personal dysfunction to my own benefit.
Why
often.
not?
So Rob does the research and he's like, well, it'll pass 4K 120.
No.
Or 60, 4K 60.
Yeah, your X4300H will pass 4K 60. It'll pass Dolby Vision. It'll pass HDR10. It won't pass along VRR reliably, and it won't pass 120 frames per second. But we all know how critical a gamer Tom is on his Xbox Series X.
Have not plugged my Xbox Series X back in since I moved things around in here. Still haven't done it. So after all that, got the C2.
Got the C2.
83-inch C2 for $3,000.
There it is.
So delivered on Sunday.
So very little time that Tom has had with this TV as we're recording this podcast this week on Tuesday morning.
So we get the TV, and I actually ordered the Pearl Smith stand that he talks about, which, by the way, is fine. It does not work as well for me as I wanted it to. And then the reason is that my center channel is so big that it doesn't sit on the stand.
Ah, right. Okay.
It hangs way too far over. So I pushed the TV a little bit further back than I really wanted to, and the speaker is still hanging off the front of the piece of furniture that we got at a consignment shop here in town for pretty cheap. But I sat on it, I stood on it, and I weigh a lot more than that stupid TV does, so it was fine. But it's good. Nothing makes you feel good about an 83-inch TV on a stand.
Yeah, with a pedestal stand in the middle, it looks like that is going to tip over. I agree. It looks that way.
Yes, but it does not. It has been fine so far.
Yes.
So got it all set up. So the TV came first, and I had to wait for the stand, and I assembled the stand, and I put the TV on the stand, and the whole thing wobbled, and I realized I put the thing on the stand wrong. So we took the TV back off, put the stand back together correctly, I think. I hope. It seems to be working. Put it back on the stand, got it to the right height. Took a couple of little goes there, because there's no real way to know.
I mean, you can measure thrice and apply once. It is doable.
Not doing that.
Okay.
So
trial and error instead.
Trial and error that bad boy instead. So got it up there. It's a really good height, I think. We left the projection screen on the wall. I was ready to take it off. And my wife was like, nah, leave it up there because it covers the window.
Okay.
Because if I take it down, then she's going to want to buy blinds for it. Yeah. Better blinds, because we got really crappy, like falling apart plastic blinds that are behind there. And she doesn't want to do that. So she says, leave it up there. We can take it down later, which is fine because it's easy to move the TV. I have with my son. I just pick it up and put it on the ground and then whatever. So set it up.
Yes.
And could not for the life of me get a picture.
Now, are you saying any picture whatsoever? As soon as you power it on, the LG logo doesn't even show up?
No. Got the logo, got the screensaver crap, could get into the menus.
So you know that the pixels are capable of lighting.
That's right. So all of that's working, but I plug it into the receiver. I got an 8K, ultra high speed certified fiber optic cable.
Okay.
I know that it's worked because I have used it before.
I have a guess now.
Yes, you do know now, don't you? If you don't know,
I didn't know that little detail before.
I know, that's why I didn't tell you. So I text Rob. I'm like, this stupid thing, I can't get it to work. I don't know what's going on.
He didn't mention that he had a new fiber optic cable.
It's not new. It's not new to me. I've had it for a while. I've used it. I used it on that projector that that ultra short throw projector that I used. That I tested. And so I get this thing, and I said, I can't get the picture. And then Rob starts texting me all a bunch of like suggestions and all these other things, and I'm doing my own troubleshooting at the same time.
Of course.
And the only response Rob gets from me is, I figured it out and I'm not telling you how.
Yeah,
I'm telling you what, I figured out what stupid mistake I made.
I'll tell you on Tuesday.
I'll tell you on Tuesday.
Good enough. I was
and then he keeps texting me because he's Rob. And I text back like, I can't text you. I can't respond to you right now. I'm watching a movie, which we will talk about in a second. What did I do wrong, Rob?
I'm pretty darn sure with the fiber optic cable that you put the source end into the TV and the TV end into the AV receiver. Yeah. You plugged in the HDMI cable backwards, even though they are labeled on the plugs. They have a label. They are labeled, but
I wasn't looking. The room's half dark. I'm not looking. So it wasn't that I looked down at the cable and saw it. I did figure it out. I did. Yes. I said I was talking just like I'm talking to you right now. Yeah. I was talking to my family. Like, I know this cable works. It's an 8K. Oh crap! And I looked at the cable and went, God, 50-50 shot. I got it wrong. How many times am I going to get a 50-50 shot like that wrong? Yeah. 100% of the time.
So see, I had a couple of guesses that I texted to Tom, because one of them was when you first set up an LG OLED, there is a whole setup process that you have to go through before you can get to anything. One of which is you have to agree to a whole bunch of data sharing. Yes. And I was like, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, I don't think it's the LG OLEDs, but there was a TV from somebody, and I don't want to besmirch them, but I think it was Vizio, where if you didn't agree to the data sharing, they actually prevented some of the sources from working, because they were basically like, you can watch the internet sources because we're going to get that data no matter what you agree to, but like other things, if you don't agree to share your user data and how you use this television with us, they actually like prevent, or they like knock down what resolution it supports or some weird thing like that. So I was like, okay, did you, being Tom, just be like, no, I don't agree to any of this and just try to get going? I'm like, could that have been it? And then the other one I was thinking of, I didn't text this to Tom, but I was like, it's got the remote, which acts like a Wii remote. There's like a cursor that moves around when you wiggle your hand.
So much.
And the OK button is also a scroll wheel.
Yes, it is.
So sometimes when you would just want to click OK, you accidentally scroll down or up a click, and that can like bring up the mouse cursor and prevent you from clicking OK. I was like, is it possible this is like a literal hand mechanical issue trying to use this remote? Because, Tom hasn't used them extensively before. I was like, that some weird possibility like that. But no, it's the HDMI cable. Okay.
It was HDMI cable. So once I flipped that around, everything started working fine. Yes. I got everything kind of set up, went through the routines settings. Sure. Set those up as best I could on the fly. Yeah. Everybody was sitting in the room watching me. Okay, so yes. I'm like...
watching and waiting.
A lot of pressure. So I was like, okay, got it pretty close. Did all the settings I was supposed to do. Stuck in Barbie.
Okay.
So if you remember, the last time I watched Barbie, it was in like 3.2 or something like that, right? 3.2 on the projector, right? And I had the STR wrong.
Yeah.
On the projector, so it was
HDR
washed
to SDR
out.
Conversion, so it was all washed out.
It was all washed out. So I straight up bamboozled my family, so that I could make sure that my wife thought that this purchase was worth it. Okay, because now we had it in full surround sound, which she didn't give a crap about. Yeah, full Atmos, except for my top middles, which aren't powered right now because I don't have an amp, and but it was in full HDR. Yes. I mean, it was gorgeous. Yes. Gorgeous colors. It was just, it was popping. right? The one thing I noticed was the blacks were a little crushed.
Okay.
So I was like, okay.
Maybe that's just an OLED thing, because
maybe
like people like Vincent Teo have detailed measurements where it's like the first two signal levels just above absolute black are essentially impossible for an OLED panel to show. So there is like inherent black crush, but it's not very much. It's like the first two levels above black, but if you're like like using this for mastering purposes, that might actually matter to you. But what Tom was describing was much worse than that.
So on the Barbie movie, it was just there was the dance sequence with the Kens, and they're all wearing black shirts.
Yeah,
and there was just straight black blobs. Like there was no definition to their shirts whatsoever. I was like, no one else in the room noticed it. I noticed it. Yeah. So then later on in the day, I was like, oh, okay. I texted Rob about that. He's like, oh, well, it could be a couple things, whatever. We'll take a look at it. I was like, okay. So then later on in the day, my son, who wasn't feeling well, he came in here and we started watching The Bad Batch, which is a show that on Disney Plus,
animated Star Wars series.
Yeah. So freaking dark. Like you couldn't see anything. You could barely see, like if their armor was in shadow, it was gone. Yeah. Like you could just see their faces. I was like, okay, something is not right. And I'm trying to fix it while we're watching, and he's getting mad at me. I'm just like, whatever. So there was a couple things that I ended up doing. So if you've got one of these TVs or similar TV, I told Rob what was a video something, right? Video.
So it was something I mentioned back when you first talked about there being Black Crush, and I was like, okay, in the I'm forgetting exactly which section of the settings, the brightness section of the settings, there is a video range option. Yes. So what video range is about is most video signals actually have below black information and above white information. So if we're talking about an 8-bit signal, which is the easiest way to talk about it because I know the numbers off the top of my head, the values from 0 through 15 in an 8-bit signal are below black, and then 16 is black. It's video black. That's where black is supposed to be. And then up at the top, 255 is the maximum value, but everything from 236 up to 255 is above white, and 235 is video white. But if you're using a computer, computers just use the entire 0 to 255 range. They call it the full video range instead of the limited video range from 0 to 255. So if you have a signal that's being sent that's using 0 as absolute black, but the TV is expecting 16 to be black and then everything below 16 to be below black, it means that it doesn't show you any detail in the shadows until the video signal gets to 16 or above, and everything below that is just crushed to pure black by the television because it's expecting black to be at 16, not 0.
Right. So I changed that to full, which fixed the majority of the problem.
Voila.
So the other thing was that, and that setting is not in the ratings thing anywhere that I saw. I went back and looked for
probably
it.
not. Because, I mean, normally leaving the video range set to auto, which is the default,
which is what I did,
mostly works, but there are some devices. We've discovered that Tom's Roku is such a device. The Nintendo Switch also does this incorrectly. I told Tom it's like the same thing, but it's actually the reverse, where the Switch is the television believes it's getting a 0 to 255 signal, but the Switch isn't sending out black until it hits 16, which means everything is over brightened. The shadows are all gray instead of being black.
So what ended up happening is there's another setting in there it says this in the ratings thing. It's like HDMI mode or HDMI, and under the HDMI settings, it's the deep color, and it's like off or something, or
it's
whatever.
Off by default. It normally auto detects when you send it an HDR signal and turns on the enhanced setting. Normally it detects that automatically, but not always.
Yeah, so it says put it into 4K.
Yes.
And that will... So I had done that. I had done that when we were watching the Barbie movie. And when I went to the Roku, it was still in that setting. Sure. And I was like, I wonder if that's making a difference too.
Okay.
So I switched it to off, and I was like, I don't know, it looks kind of the same. Maybe it's a little bit better. Maybe it's a little bit different. I can't really do it. But now I can't get it to go back into 4K. Like I go back to 4K, the Roku will not give me a picture at all.
Oh, okay.
So now it's just set to off because I got no choice if I want to watch it. But I did watch one of the episodes again last night on The Bad Batch that were... I just watched the first half of it or whatever because I knew it was a very dark episode. It was one of the ones that we were watching that was really, really bad. And it's so much better.
Yes. So you can actually see detail in the shadows.
Yes. So I'm already shopping for a Apple TV 4K, but my wife is straight up going to divorce me if I get any more devices in this house. We've gotten a new car because my car broke down.
Yeah.
We got a new refrigerator because our refrigerator broke down. We got a new TV because the projector broke down. We got a stand for the projector.
Yeah.
There's just too much stuff has come into this house. Yes. I'm out of money. So I have to figure out, and sending back the $60 amp because of Greg is actually going to make a big emotional difference in this house. So thank you, Greg, for that.
Okay.
Provided that it works, which I'm sure it will. But I am now already shopping for an Apple TV 4K or something similar so that I can...
Like an NVIDIA Shield, yeah.
Yeah, I can't justify an NVIDIA Shield, I'm sure. It's just... I'm never going to use all the capabilities of that. But we can talk about it on a different thing. So the other thing I watched was I started catching up on Ahsoka. And I think I've watched through episode 7 now.
Okay.
So it's so funny because I keep thinking as I'm watching, I'm like, wow, this looks so much better than my projector. That 4K really makes a difference. And then I look at it and go, excuse me, dog, if I'm in your way, let me know. Jesus Christ.
There was a doggo on the couch behind Tom if you're not watching the YouTube version.
Are you trying to leave the room?
Must be.
Go ahead. You are trying to leave the room? Oh, you're going to have to open the door with your big old head. Go on. Well, I'm not doing it. I can't reach it. So I... yeah, he got it.
Okay.
So
good for the dog.
Good for him. Good boy, Felix.
Yes.
So I sit there and I'm like, oh, this 4K makes a difference. The resolution isn't... I can't see anything more, really. From the resolution side, I'm like, I'm seeing the same stuff. It's just the gradations and the colors.
Yes.
Make things so much more lifelike. And I'm telling you...
increased contrast. There is unquestionably dramatically increased contrast.
So I'm watching Barbie. I'm like, this is the first time I've ever seen Margot Robbie and gone, oh, there's a little flaw right there.
She's
Margot
human?
Robbie.
How dare she?
It's like I can kind of see where the makeup stops. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? In some of these scenes, I was like, "Oh my god!" And then again, when you're watching Ahsoka, the special effects and the makeup and everything else that's on there is just so impeccable. And I see so much more. I'm like, that little boy's hair was green. I didn't notice that before. It wasn't green before. And there's like tattoo weirdness on Hera's head tentacles or whatever those things are called. So yes, the difference in the picture quality is stunning. I mean, it is stunning. And it is like, I need to figure out how to turn down the brightness of my volume thing, because every time that thing pops up, I'm like,
oh, right.
Turn it off.
The on-screen display from the AV receiver. Gotcha.
So yes, very happy.
Yay.
Everybody, I've been telling you guys to do it. I followed my own advice.
Yes.
I actually told my wife, I'm like, listen, if I don't get an OLED, I don't think they're going to let me do the podcast anymore. Like, I think that people will mutiny.
And the 83-inch size?
Yes, it's fine.
Looking good.
It is a little bit further back than it needs to be.
Okay,
it should be a little bit closer. You can kind of tell, you sit down and you can still see a little bit of the white screen around it for the projector
maybe
screen.
Get some feet that you can put below the center speaker, so the center can actually go on top of the Pearl Smith stand, like the back portion of it
so
can,
I
and then
slide it forward. So the two problems
I
was having two problems. One is I have banana plugs on my speaker cables, which we're not letting the stand get close enough.
Okay.
Like I could get
that can be changed.
I know, but then I have to rewire everything. I don't want to do that. Anyways, it doesn't matter. We will talk about that later. Let's get into the podcast. Let's talk about the news.
And let's go quickly.
RSL has announced a new entry-level subwoofer model. The SpeedWoofer 10E will be available starting March 29th, and it costs just 300 smackaroonies. Dimensions are a touch smaller than the SpeedWoofer 10S Mark II. 10E. I like the fact that they went with E. Yeah. I don't know how that makes it different, whatever. Anyways, maybe economy that we like so much as its $450 price point, basically a 15-inch cube instead of a 16-inch cube. The stamped 10-inch driver helps lower the price for the new 10E. I have no problem with stamped drivers, baskets or whatever. It's fine, okay? They can be made just as well. It's no problem. It's more efficient. It's quicker. It's cheaper to make. If you're looking, I mean, I don't quite understand. People are like, oh, I don't really need all that much, so I can have something cheaper. And they're like, well, it doesn't have the same performance as the $7,000 one. Of course it doesn't. You just ask for something cheap. So this will be fine for this application.
Very reasonable design choice that they made here.
The amp is a 300 watts RMS, Class D, which is typical, with a switch mode power supply. And all this leads to a claimed extension of 26 hertz at minus 3 dB. I don't want to hear you complaining. It's a 10-inch subwoofer for $300.
Right.
It doesn't go to 20
$300.
hertz. Yes, it's fine. And most of us, probably including myself, would sit in a room with a 26 hertz extension subwoofer and go, wow, that sounds really bassy. The RSL specs for the 10S Mark II and the 12S subs have been accurate according to the measurements. So their measurements are in their claims, and whatever, our measurements are the same. So there's no reason to doubt the specs of the new 10E. Naturally, the amplifier is a bit bare bones. There's no DSP or variable tuning. It's okay. A pair of RCA inputs only with no speaker level inputs. Also okay. REL can have all those. Or RCA outputs for daisy chaining, which you don't need because Y splitters exist and they cost $2. Yep. They do, however, provide a fully variable phase knob, which is something that not everybody else can figure out.
Wouldn't expect it. That's fantastic. Love it.
And you can turn the auto signal sensing on or off, which is also good. The built-in low-pass filter only applies a 12 dB octave slope, so you'll almost certainly want to use this with bass management from an AV receiver, which is what we would recommend anyways.
Very reasonable.
Shipping is included in the price, which is insane,
I know.
to the continuous 48 states, so we fully expect this to be yet another very popular subwoofer model for RSL.
It does only come in black with a black grille. They don't have any other finish options.
Well, then cancel it. Right, cancel my order.
But yeah, no, I'm happy with this. This is definitely going to fulfill the needs of some people, and this is going to be one that we are sure to be recommending to some folks.
Yes, we will be. Let me scroll down because I just SVS's new. Oh yeah, I just sent you this email this morning. Yeah. SVS's new Ultra Evolution Series speakers have arrived. You can order 5 of the new 7 speaker models now, with the smallest Ultra Evolution's Tower and Ultra Evolution Nano bookshelf models coming later this year. We detailed them back in episode 896, but reiterate some of their key features. Front baffles have a curved or slanted design that aligns the voice coils for no real or apparent benefit in the sound. All the front-facing drivers, SVS calls this acoustically centered time alignment. We call it. That's what I call it.
I mean, it's a design choice. You can recognize them.
It looks cool.
That's what it's for.
It's aesthetic. AES studies on the topic suggest it does no harm, but also provides no audible benefit. But SVS claims it provides optimal imaging and soundstage, which is what they have to claim to justify the conclusion. Right. Hey, if they want to charge more for their speakers, and one of the ways they're doing it is this, that's fine. If I were on the market for speakers, I would be going to their closeout store sales that they've been having and just scooping them up.
The original Ultra series that is going away.
Yeah. The new Ultra Evolution tweeter, used across all 7 speaker models, is an aluminum dome with a micro layer of a diamond applied to it via vapor deposition. SVS claims this provides additional stiffness that increases frequency range while reducing distortion. Sure, whatever. Jesus, I'm sorry. The 3 different sizes of tower models, Pinnacle, Titan, and Tower. Which one's the biggest one? Titan?
Pinnacle is the biggest. Titan is the middle. Tower is the smallest. And coming later.
I don't know. I think we should switch those. I think it should be Titan, Pinnacle, and Tower. Have a curved cabinet that naturally provides sufficient space for the rear-firing ports, and bass woofers, even at the back of the speakers, push right up against a wall. The dual rear-firing bass woofers are there to force cancel the dual front-facing bass woofer, similar to SVS's own 3000 micro subwoofer. The center gets a raked-back design and dual rear-facing ports. The Nano and bookshelf models are also curved and rear-ported, and everything gets dual binding posts except the Nano and Elevation. Speaking of which, SVS says their new Ultra Elevation is their most requested speaker from customers. It also has a rear port, but the included mounting bracket provides sufficient space from the wall and makes it easy to wall or ceiling mount the wedge-shaped speaker. All models will come in gloss black, gloss white, and black oak finish options, and the prices are as follows. And there's a whole bunch of prices here. We will link those up. I'm not reading through all that crap.
Okay. They are more expensive than the outgoing Ultra series. That is sort of the upshot of that. And that's there it is. They're available now. You can order them, except that the smallest tower model, which is just called the Tower, and the Nano, which is the smaller bookshelf model, those you will have to wait a little bit for those to arrive.
Yeah. Comments. Kris appreciated our response to his question about wanting to hear the very best signal quality that Tidal has to offer. He had forgotten about the 48 kilohertz limit imposed by bass management and Odyssey room corrections that his receiver uses, and he definitely doesn't want to turn those off. So he will just stick to his NVIDIA Shield, use lossless CD quality and Atmos music streaming that it supports from Tidal, and not worry about the high-res stuff. Mindset adjusted. Sasi felt compelled to write in regards to Bo's choice of subwoofers for his 10,000 cubic foot listening room, which may or may not be that big. Mine actually bigger. His email almost sounded a little worried or panicked as he wrote what he thought it was important to head this off early. He said he has seen people get solid advice, including from us, only to be persuaded out of it when they go talk to their audio dealers. And that's totally normal.
Yep.
Seeing somebody face to face, you're more likely to be convinced by them than some random voice on a podcast, and I understand that. And I honestly don't care. If it's your money, you buy what you want. It's fine. It's up to you. So he just wants to stress how much he agreed with our suggestion to consider a pair of JTR subwoofers instead of the JL Audio Gotham subs that both seemed intent on buying. There's a large gap in price, and with that price difference, why not have the JTR subs custom finished if you don't like their regular plain black looks? JTR will actually sell them unfinished, just bare wood, which is Baltic birch, for the cabinets that you can have finished whatever way you like by local paint specialists. They also have several different options for the cabinet shapes, all with the same internal volume but different dimensions to accommodate different depths and heights. He's seen other audiophiles swayed by the claims that JL Audio and REL subs are somehow more musical, but none of the measurements bear that out, which we have talked about. So Sasi is convinced that just the plain looks and the lower price tag that it is just the plain looks and the lower price tag that makes audiophiles think that JTR subs must be inferior in some way. He also suggests that Funk Audio, Harbottle,
yep,
yeah, whatever, Audio and Seaton Sound could be options, but they've experienced nobody beats the clean output capabilities of JTR subs unless they are way more expensive and even bigger. It's really the expensive part. It just comes along with being bigger.
Yeah, like RBH's newest 21-inch subs, I think they have a dual 21-inch as an option, is exceedingly expensive, but is one of the few subs that could actually, by the measurements, slightly outdo JTR's Captivator 4000 ULF options. But yeah, I just want to, assure Sasi that, obviously there's no disagreement between him and us. I right off the top of my head, I was like, yeah, if you want a much more affordable but capable of pressurizing 10,000 cubic foot subwoofer option, JTR Captivator 4000 ULF is absolutely what I would personally go for. I completely agree with the quite substantial difference in price. You could have it custom finished and still come out ahead as far as price goes. So yeah, no disagreement there. However, I want to, also assuage Sasi's fears that it's like, yeah, there is lots of stuff where you get it and it performs fantastic. And if sheer price tag is not your number one concern. And one of the things that Bo expressed is that he wants to maintain his dealer relationship. They sell JL Audio. I doubt that they sell JTR, since right. JTR is primarily, manufacturer direct. And I don't think he's going to get a pair of JL Audio Gothams, install them, and be like, oh, these are just a horrible choice. I was ripped off performance-wise. Could he spend less? Absolutely. We're all in agreement there. Bo is in agreement there. He knows he could spend less, but he's like, I love the way they look, which, yeah, the JL Audio Gothams are pretty darn gorgeous for how big they are. It maintains that dealer relationship, and he doesn't mind the price. So when all of that is, taken into account, I have no problem with someone going that route. It's not what I would choose for myself because I care more about the price tag than Bo does. Even if I had a lot more money than I do, there's a part of my personality where I would still prefer to pay less. But yeah, don't worry about it. We're all in agreement here, and it's all good.
Yeah. All right. Sorry. Infinite Gary. This is the first question here. If you want to A/B compare two different pairs of speakers, it seems to be a given that you should level match them. He understands the explanation that we tend to simply prefer whichever speakers are louder, whichever pair of speakers are louder, and if that difference exists. But he was thinking, let's just say he listens to one pair of speakers on their own for a while and he adjusts the volumes to where he thinks they sound their best. Then he listens to another pair of speakers and he adjusts their volume to where they sound the best. Those might not be equal volumes, but it's where a pair of speakers sounds their best, each pair at least. Now it's best versus best, not just pure equal volume. Would that not be a better way to compare them fairly? No. No. It's not. And the reason is very simple, at least to me. If a pair of speakers needs to be a certain volume in order to be good in your space, which is what we're talking about here, you can set both pair of speakers to the highest volume that's necessary in those things, right? Okay. You level match them, and then you turn them up to some volume, but they're both at the same volume. So if the good speaker that sounds good softer should sound still good louder. And if it doesn't,
unless
then
it's starting to distort.
That's right.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then it doesn't sound good in your room, period. So we're not talking about...
It can't get loud enough for your setting unless you push it into distortion. Yeah.
And we're not, the difference here is you're talking about what sounds best in my room versus what is objectively best. So you're talking about A and B and speakers in your space. So you should level match them. You should turn them up both. The volume should be so that it's the volume level that you listen at. And if one sounds better than the other, then for whatever reason, it doesn't matter if it's just distorting or not distorting or you just prefer it or whatever, that's the one you choose. But you're not really testing the speaker at that point. You're testing the sound system, which is the room and the speaker.
Yeah,
but objectively, you set them, if you want to test A/B speakers and say which one objectively performs better, you put it in a room where the room doesn't make any difference, like an anechoic chamber. You set them to the same volume, which you level match them, and then you put a microphone the same distance from each one of them, and you take measurements, which is how you do that.
It's all about trying to limit variables. Volume is definitely a variable, a very noticeable and large variable. So we want to try and limit the variables. Now, if you're in a situation, I don't think that this approach has no merit whatsoever because it quite readily reveals if one of the pairs of speakers under test is reaching its volume output limits. If this is being all about a purchase decision and you're able to audition these in your home, in your room, and you're discovering this one pair of speakers that I'm auditioning, I can turn it up louder than ever I would ever want to listen. And I can, turn it up to where I think they sound best, and that's great. This other pair of speakers, I have to limit how loud I turn them up. If I go past that, I don't like the way they sound anymore. Well, I mean, that has revealed a very valuable part of your purchase decision to you there. So it's not that I don't think there's any merit to this whatsoever. If, however, this is more like I'm in a setting that isn't my own room, this isn't a purchase decision, I'm just trying to detect differences between two different pairs of speakers under test, then what you would want to do is set them both to the lowest common denominator. You would want to, if one speaker starts sounding bad by the time you turn it up past a certain volume level, well, then you're going to get it as loud as it can go before it starts sounding bad. You're going to stop there, and then you're going to bring the other pair of speakers that you're comparing down to that same level, even though the other pair of speakers is capable of going louder and sounds even better to you when it does. You're going to bring them down to the lowest common denominator so that you're eliminating that variable. It's like, why did the second pair of speakers sound better than the other ones? Because I was able to play them louder without them distorting. That's why. Right. Like you've shrunk everything down to that one variable again. So we want to get rid of that if we're trying to detect other differences besides just sheer volume and output capability.
Yes. John says he has us to thank for his current home theater gear choices. His room is definitely not a perfect rectangle. It's very asymmetrical and as opposed to slightly asymmetrical.
That's right.
And it has vaulted ceilings, but it's enclosed as a solid core door.
Yeah.
Which is heavier than he thought it was going to be. And the room is its own separate HVAC zone, which I wish I had.
That's nice.
It is 3,600 cubic feet in air volume. It has 5 Ascend Sierra RAW speakers on the floor level. Too bad you didn't get the Ultras. Sorry.
I don't agree with that. That's an offhanded comment. I think you got some fantastic speakers.
Along with 4 outdoor speaker depot in-ceiling speakers and a single HSU VTF3 Mark V for now. It literally is like he just listened to the podcast and said, I'll order that.
Those are very much products that we have recommended on this very podcast.
Yes. His receiver is a Denon X4400H. He's got a 65-inch Vizio and a Roku Ultra and a Sony X700 Ultra HD Blu-ray player, which is the same. I think it's the same one I have.
Same player you've got. That's right.
Yeah. Which doesn't do Dolby Vision, which I didn't care about at the time, but now I do care about.
Well, the X700 can. You just have to manually turn it on and off. And even if the signal is not Dolby Vision on the disc, it'll still come out in a Dolby Vision container when you manually turn it on. So, yeah,
I'll have to remember
it's not
that.
Great.
He's got 4-inch thick acoustic panels covering his front and back walls. So he's saving up for an 83-inch OLED to replace his Vizio. There's 3,000 from Amazon. C2s. Get them now. Get them while they last. And he intends to get a second subwoofer. So, should he get his VTF3 Mark V and add a second sub to it? It would be nice if the second sub had a smaller footprint. It was all, and yeah, I wonder what we're going to recommend.
An HSU sub that's very similar to the VTF3 Mark V that has a smaller footprint?
If only such a sub existed.
That's right.
So would he be better off selling as HSU and get a pair of SVS cylinders? Yes. No, actually no.
Not particularly.
He could, or could he add one cylinder to a setup and have them match well enough? For 3,600 cubic feet, is a PC 2000 Pro cylinder up to the task, or does he need a higher end model?
Here we go. Do we have a chart for you?
We have a chart, and you go to avgadgets.com. Is my subwoofer big enough? Which we will link, and it links you over to the chart at AVS.
AV Forums, which is the UK forum. It is not AVS, although they probably have this somewhere posted on AVS forum as well, stolen. But AV Forums had the original post. Yeah. So that is where AV Gadgets links out to.
Yes, and I'll walk you through how to do it. So I don't think that the PC 2000 is big enough for is good enough for 3,600 cubic feet. It's very. We're going to,
of course, be looking at the 3,500 cubic foot because that's what's listed in the chart, which is pretty close to 3,600 cubic feet. And what we're going to see is his VTF 15. No, he's got the VTF 3 Mark V. That is listed on this chart, and we'll see that at 3,500 cubic feet, it's saying that at 20 hertz. You're going to be 2 decibels below reference volume. Okay. And then right below that is not the PC 2000 Pro, but the PB 2000 Pro, which has exactly the same output capabilities as the cylinder version. It is also 2 decibels below reference volume at 20 hertz.
When you put them both in the same room, you're going to get like a 3 to 4 dB bump.
You're going to get a 3 to 4 dB bump by adding that second sub. So first of all, is the PC 2000 Pro cylinder very similar to the VTF3 Mark V? That could you use those 2 subs together without any issue? Absolutely. They are exceedingly similar subs in output and extension. And when you combine 2 of them in your 3,600 cubic foot room, you're going to be like right at reference volume at 20 hertz with those 2 subs. You're ever so slightly below it, right down at 20 hertz with just the single sub, but you put the pair of them together and you're right there. So yes, basically the answer to your questions is you can do all the things you had in mind. However, we can of course mention that HSU has just released their new VTF TN1, which is a smaller footprint, an 18.5-inch square for the footprint, but taller. And actually has greater output capability than your VTF3 Mark V, but they're certainly close enough. The TN1 is just going to have some additional headroom that basically never gets used. The thing is, the PC 2000 Pro cylinder is actually a little bit less expensive. The TN1 is now at full price, and you have to go on a wait list because they have sold out of their initial run very, very quickly. So now that it's at full price, the TN1 from HSU would be $1,300 after you include shipping, whereas the PC 2000 Pro cylinder is $1,100, and that includes shipping. So if you like the PC 2000 Pro, you prefer the cylinder form factor or anything like that, it's a little bit less expensive. It's readily available right this second. You don't have to wait for it, and it will absolutely match very, very well with your VTF3 Mark V. There's no reason to sell your VTF3 if it fits where it's already fitting. You don't have to sell it and get 2 brand new subs. You're right in the ballpark for the amount of output you need.
But you should definitely get 2 cylinders because they're sexier than boxes. Cylinders greater than boxes. I'll just say that from my heart. We've talked about how quite a few streaming movies and even some disc releases have rolled off the deep bass, or in the case of Thor Ragnarok, just don't have it. Just don't have bass at all.
Yes.
Just decided, you know what? We're going to save some money on this disc release. We're not going to put subwoofers. I don't think it
saved any money. I don't see how it
just going to cut it all off. We're going to roll it off at 250 hertz. Done.
Yep.
You've seen people in the forums discussing how to fix and bring back that deep bass by applying EQ. He already owns a U-Mic 1 and a mini DSP, didn't exactly say which mini DSP model, and has some experience measuring with Room EQ Wizard, but doesn't have any interest in creating a whole bespoke EQ curve for each individual movie. Well, then I've got some bad news for you. At most, he'd like to have his regular EQ for well-mastered movies and then apply a second EQ that applies a bass boost for movies where the bass is rolled off. He'd like it to be as easy as a push of a button to switch between those 2 curves. Is there a solution that could work for him and be that simple? And what should that bass boost curve look like? What are the problem frequencies?
Yeah.
So we talked about this before. There is a whole group of insane people who's they just basically go look at the frequency response of the different movies and go, this is the problem, this is where it rolls off, and they give you individual bass curves that you can upload to your
mini DSP
usually.
That's the most common thing. Specifically the 2x4 HD. Yeah, the 2x4 HD model. That is the BEQ catalog. We will have a link there. They have increased the number of contributors so that the number of titles and catalogs is growing ever higher.
Contagious.
Yes, they have a whole software-based system that actually produces a histogram, so you can look at the audio response in visual form, and that's where they can see, hey, this bass at 21 hertz, it does exist, it's there, it's just clearly been rolled off by however many dB, and so they create these bespoke EQ curves for one movie at a time, post them over there at the BEQ catalog, and if you want to dig into it that much for each individual title, that would be the resource to do it. But I completely get where we're coming from here, that you don't want to do it bespoke and movie by movie. So what I would suggest to you, first of all, the device you would want to get to do this would be the Mini DSP 2x4 HD specifically. So he said he already had a Mini DSP. I'm wondering if maybe he had like the original 2x4 that didn't have all of the exact same capabilities. And then critically, what the 2x4 HD offers you is it comes with an IR remote, which the original 2x4 did not. And the remote that it comes with has 4 preset buttons. You can store 4 preset EQ curves in the Mini DSP 2x4 HD and recall each of those curves at the push of a button. So when you're talking about making it that easy to control, that's the device you would want to get to do it. It's $225, so it's not, absolutely cheap as chips, but it's not ridiculously expensive to get the device that would let you have that control. In terms of what would be the single bass boosting curve that I would probably apply, that's going to do a reasonable job across the greatest number of movies that the BEQ catalog indicates have this rolled off bass. The most common correction that I have seen across the greatest number of movies on that BEQ catalog is applying a bass boost at 22 hertz. They give that a Q of 0.8 or 0.9, which is a fairly wide thing. So above and below 22 hertz, it's applying some boost, and applying what's called a low shelf filter, which basically means it only boosts below the frequency that you choose, and then the curve, the Q-based curve just above it. But what I mean is it isn't like a linear curve that applies a boost across all frequencies or something like that. It is a curve, a sweeping upward curve on the low end, which is exactly what counteracts most of the rolled off bass. Generally, a 15 decibel boost, which the way that you would do that in the Mini DSP 2x4 HD is actually creating 3 5 decibel low shelf filters, because there's a limit on how great you can boost it, but you can cascade filters on top of each other. So you create 3 5 decibel low shelf filters centered at 22 hertz with a Q of about 0.8, and that's the most common thing that I've seen in terms of the bass roll-off. It's not going to be perfect for every single movie, but it's fairly safe as long as you have a subwoofer that has reasonable DSP or feedback, like Rhythmic has with their servo feedback or something, reasonable protection on that driver. So even if you forget to turn it off and then you have a movie that doesn't have rolled off bass, you're going to notice it, but it shouldn't damage your subwoofer, because there are some movies where they're like, yeah, there's rolled off bass at 18 hertz. It exists in the signal and it's 45 decibels quieter than reference. And some people are crazy enough to apply that EQ to it. I wouldn't do that myself, but that would be my recommendations. Done.
Yeah. I just recently wrote an article about this kind of thing. And it's hard because if you go online and just ask randos, right, the answer you're going to get is, oh, just bump up the bass trim. Just go to your subwoofer and increase the trim levels. Or go to the back of your subwoofer and turn up the volume knob. Now you have more bass. But that's a really bad solution. What that does is that increases all your bass.
Everything the subwoofer is playing.
And then where the crossover happens, suddenly your subwoofer is way too loud compared to your speakers.
And you can actually notice the handoff from the speakers down to the subs, because there's this massive change right at that crossover range.
So the solution, if you're going to do a global one, is doing what basically Rob said, or you go into your target curve of your Odyssey and you make a new target curve which has the bass boost in there, which you can do.
If you have one of the newer models that gives you 2 presets that you can switch between. But if it's a little bit older Denon or Marantz receiver that has Odyssey where they didn't have 2 presets that you can switch between, then having this Mini DSP is the much faster solution.
Right. The article that I wrote was more addressing people who are like globally, I just want more bass.
Sure.
I want it to always apply. So you would change that target curve. Now it allows your crossover region to work properly, and you don't have this weird unevenness. So what Rob's saying is absolutely true, especially if you're trying to switch between different presets. Hopefully you already have that mini DSP that he's talking about.
If you already got the 2x4 HD, you're good to go. You can, like, if you got the original the 2x4 HD when it first released and it didn't come with the remote packed in the box, it's $7 from mini DSP to get the remote. But if you have the original 2x4, not the 2x4 HD, the 2x4 doesn't work with the IR remote. It doesn't have an IR sensor. It wasn't ever designed to work with the remote. So it's the 2x4 HD that you need for sure. If you got it early and it didn't come with the remote, it's only $7 to add it. Or you can just purchase a whole new 2x4 HD for $225, and it will come with the IR remote in the box today.
Adam, in the past, we've recommended APC's battery backup units when we just want a low price and some decent battery power protection. He actually asked us one time if it'd be okay for his PS5, and we said it might not be the very best choice, but it's fine, so we got one. He heard us mention their newest BACCH UPS BE models that have a new case design and have a bit higher in wattage. But we mentioned how there's still a stepped approximation to a sine wave and not a true sine wave, and we specifically called out the PS5 as a device that might run into problems with that type of battery. Speaking of which, I just plugged my OLED into a wall because the power cord's not long enough, and I'm not moving everything. So yeah, I gotta do something. Does it have to cool down? Does it have a fan? It doesn't have a fan, right? It just turns off.
But it does run a compensation cycle to make sure you don't get any burn-in, so you don't want to unplug it from the wall entirely when you turn it off.
Okay. So I've got to figure out a way to run an extension cord or something over there. It's not a big deal. So should you be concerned about having a PS5 plugged into a BE850 G2 unit? And what would be the best battery backup for protecting a PS5? So
yeah,
a sine wave is what you need.
Yeah, this is all about the power supplies that use power factor correction, which is the most common thing we're seeing in computers these days, and it is the type of power supply that the PS5 uses. Now, the main issue with having a power factor correction power supply plugged into a stepped approximation of a sine wave battery backup is that if that power supply is nearing its maximum draw, which of course in high-end PCs can happen, it fluctuates. If it's nearing its maximum power draw, very often that stepped approximation of sine wave will basically result in the computer just shutting off as though it just got completely unplugged from the wall, and now it isn't doing what a battery backup is there to do, which is give you time to properly shut down your computer. So the PS5, because it throttles its power so much, mostly based on thermals as opposed to power draw, it's very rare that it would ever run into this issue. What I would not recommend doing is the power goes out, you've got things plugged into your BE850 unit, and you just try to keep playing your game, hoping that the power is going to come back on in 10 minutes or something like that, and you don't pause or anything like that. The chances that you're going to have an immediate cut to the PS5's power are really, really slim. So if you notice the power goes out, the lights went out, it's a blackout, and you simply pause your game, save it, and shut down the PS5, you're never going to have a problem. That's going to be fine. That's why I said it was fine originally. If you're someone who's like, I want to keep playing my game no matter what, then I would want the pure sine wave option. So like, what's the very best battery backup? It's going to be one of the pure sine wave options. You don't have to go more than the 1,000 volt amp units. So CyberPower actually has a less expensive 1,000 volt amp version going for $165 over at Amazon these days. That they put it right in the name that it's there for power factor correction PFC power supplies, pure sine wave output, 5 battery backup outlets, 5 surge only outlets. There is a 1350 volt amp version that goes for exactly $200. So if you have a couple other devices also plugged into the battery backup, you might just want the bigger battery and the greater wattage available there. The 1,000 watt version of the APC, that would be the BR1000MS. You got to be very careful on APC's model numbers because there's also like a BE1000 and a B something else 1000. So it's the BR1000 specifically that is the pure sine wave version of that, and that goes for $180. So it's $50 more than the CyberPower. They're both similar tower form factors, 5 battery backup outlets, 5 surge protection only, and similar price points. So either of those would be a great choice. But if that's too much money, don't worry too much. When the power goes out, just shut down your PS5 and you'll never have a problem.
Greg has been enjoying our recent chats about Bo and his 10,000 cubic foot audiophile setup.
Bo, you're popular if you're still listening to us.
To be clear, he completely agrees with initial advice to Bo. Don't spend piles of money on new cables and wires. Do spend money and time to properly acoustically treat your listening room. And he's all for the addition of a pair of great subwoofers. But when Greg heard Bo is searching for upgrades to a stereo system that make a real audible difference, and that was, he has around $25,000 earmarked already, he felt compelled to jump in with a suggestion. Greg took the plunge to add Theoretica Applied Physics' BACCH binaural processing to his 2-channel loudspeaker system. BACCH, which is binaural, or BACCH is what I said before. Binaural audio crosstalk cancellation hierarchy is a brainchild of Dr. Edgar Choueiri,
yeah.
Whatever. Choueiri. Okay. From Princeton University, the processing allows for binaural and ambisonic recordings to be listened to on a pair of regular stereo speakers, but also provide processing that turns any regular stereo recording into a pseudo-binaural version. A pair of binaural microphones are placed in your ears to take the measurements in at least 3 listening locations. So naturally, this BACCH system is only going to work for a single listener. You can optionally use a webcam or an infrared camera with the Grand BACCH system. I remember looking at this a while back.
Okay.
For head tracking, so you don't have to listen with your head in the vise. There's a software version for Mac computers that costs $5,000. I do remember that. Not including the binaural microphones, camera, or the Mac itself, of course. Or you can opt for one of Theoretica's sound processing hardware models that go for $20,000 all by itself. Already spent all your money. For the digital only version, $24,000 for the analog and digital version, or $54,000 for the Grand version that includes everything BACCH can possibly offer. You only got to sell one a year, really. By applying all of your processing, including your unique head-related transfer function, speaker crosstalk cancellation, there's definitely a very audible difference, according to Greg. He's certain Bo or anyone else would not need to question if adding this to the system would actually changed anything. Greg has never heard us talk about BACCH. We have, because that's how I
don't remember talking about it. So
well, then I have researched this before.
Okay.
So do we have any familiarity with it, and do we agree with his recommendation for Bo to give it a try? It is very hard for me to recommend to somebody spend this amount of money on it. You can. Oh, jeez. So I did look into it. It was a while ago. I thought we had talked about it on the podcast, but maybe I just came across it on my own. The system itself, essentially what you're trying to do is recreate the experience of having electrostatic speakers, or like
pretty close.
Very, very high-end headphones that are that maybe are paired with binaural recordings that are tailored specifically for you.
Yeah, honestly, the biggest difference that BACCH is making versus just listening on headphones is the processing they apply to take regular stereo recordings and turn them via an automated process into pseudo-binaural recordings. Now, I would imagine there's going to be some instances where the result is a little bit weird, because, much like applying any automated processing system, it's not going to be 100% flawless 100% of the time. But, I have no question that with a system like this that is attempting to cancel crosstalk between speakers, so, of course, what we're talking about there is if you play just a sound out of your front left speaker and you're just sitting in your regular seat, it's not as though only your left ear hears your front left speaker. Your right ear also hears the front left speaker. What they're trying to do is use the two speakers in concert together to cancel out you hearing the front left speaker in your right ear. They want you to only hear the front left speaker in your left ear and only hear the front right speaker in your right ear. The ambisonic system put a physical barrier between the two speakers all the way to your nose to physically block those sound waves from getting to the other side of your head. And of course, headphones isolate you that way. That's the way binaural recordings work. So this is attempting to do it without a physical barrier and without you wearing headphones and applying processing to turn regular stereo recordings into pseudo-binaural recordings. I have no question you would notice a difference in sound with all of this processing happening. That is really even though I've never had any experience with the BACCH system.
There's no world in which I suggest... This is my problem. The amount of money you're spending to get this thing, you could spend a fraction of it and get really good headphones and some binaural recordings and be done.
not just that, for right around $5,000, there is a device for headphones called the Smith Realizer. The A16 Realizer. And this, not dissimilar from what was just talked about with the BACCH system, you get a pair of binaural microphones that you put in your very own ears, and you take whatever pair of headphones you are using. This system will actually work with any pair of stereo headphones, and you play the sounds through there and measure with the binaural microphones in your very own ears. And of course, it creates a personalized head-related transfer function just for you. And then they have preset rooms that are included in the memory, but you can also record how things sound in your very own room if what you want to do is recreate the experience of your own speaker system, but through headphones. And then they have a whole forum where different users of the Smith Realizer exchange because it saves a profile of your room. They exchange profiles so that you can hear other people's rooms through your headphones through the Smith Realizer. This is a much less expensive system. Of course, it isn't speakers, but if you want that experience of binaural sound, you can do this with a pair of nice headphones and one of these Smith Realizers for a fraction of the price, 1/5 of the price. Also, the Smith Realizer, it does the head tracking thing so that you have that spatial audio experience of the source of the sound seeming fixed in space, and when you turn your head, the source of the sound doesn't seem to move along with your headphones. And you can use 2 pairs of headphones and 2 different listeners, each with their own individual profile simultaneously, and it will virtualize up to 16 virtual speaker positions inside of your headphones. So that is something where I'm like, it's not completely inexpensive, but that's a totally novel experience for anyone who's into audio. That Smith Realizer is really amazing.
Right. Like the BACCH system, I think it's certainly works. I think on some level, it may even be worth the price.
Sure.
But it's really for people who already have everything else, and they just literally want to buy something that is, that nobody else has and does what nobody else.
And
it's just so much money.
For specifically binaural and ambisonic recordings, if you want to hear them without physically altering your system or using headphones, this is kind of the only way to readily do that. The one issue I would have, if you want to even term it as an issue, is that, of course, nobody who was making a standard stereo recording was using this system or a binaural system to master their normal stereo recording. So you are, without question, not hearing an accurate representation of what the content creator was hearing for a normal stereo recording played in any mastering studio through regular speakers, right? If that's the way it was mastered and you want to hear as close to an accurate representation as the content creator intended, then this is obviously not doing that. It is changing the signal, no bones about it, and is changing the experience. But will you notice a difference? Unlike upgrading your cables and wires, you will absolutely hear a difference. So if that's what you want, I've got no problem with it.
And honestly, I don't have any problems with people buying this system.
Yeah.
I think I want to make that clear. We're saying we wouldn't recommend it. That doesn't mean that it's not without value. It's just I don't value it as much as somebody else might. I think it absolutely makes a difference. I think Rob's got some good points about the fact that if you're trying to go for the true audiophile, listen to it the way it was intended experience, applying DSP to things is usually not the way that you go about doing that.
If it's the type of audiophile who's like analog only, no processing, never digitize it, this is clearly not that.
Yeah, that's not that. It's a weird product. It's a weird product because it straddles the line between the people who have like room correction and receivers and audiophiles who want none of that. It like does a little bit of both of that crap. And you're like, who really is buying it? So, but it's a good suggestion. Thank you for sending it in.
Yeah.
I think that he should definitely consider it. And then, whatever he decides to do, what he decides to do. He's probably not listening anymore anyways.
I don't know.
Jay has a 7.2.4 configuration, golden ear speakers all around. His surrounds are in walls, and his overhead speakers are in ceiling. He tends to make and install some absorption panels on his side walls. The walkways along the sides of his room are already a little cramped, so he figures he really cannot make these panels more than 2.5 inches deep in total thickness, or else they will get bumped into. Since his surround speakers are in walls, how much wall space should he keep to either side of those speakers? In other words, how close can the absorption panels be to the in-wall speakers before they start to negatively impact the sound? He's using Golden Ear's MPX multipolar in-wall surround speakers, so they are firing sound out of them at various angles. So there's probably some exact measurement that you can come up with.
I can give you a rule of thumb. Yeah.
That Rob would. I would be like, 6 inches.
Which,
maybe 8.
Frankly, will probably be okay. If you want to go into the rule of thumb, which is basically if I don't want to impact the direct sound that my surround speaker might make to any given seat in my listening area, if I don't want to impact any possible directionality of that sound to any given seat, then to the sides and above and below those surround speakers, you would have 2 feet of distance, because basically that's a 500 hertz frequency at that wavelength, and below that we get really, really bad at hearing any directionality cues. Now, truly speaking, it's about the width of your head. Because once we go past the width of your head, we're into frequencies where we're relying on things other than just pure difference between left ear, right ear to detect directionality. And for surrounds, it's not critical enough that we're really going to be able to notice a difference. If you want the most pinpoint directional sound from your surrounds, then I'm going to say follow that rule of thumb, which would be 2 feet. But otherwise, basically 1 foot is going to do you. So if you have, panels that are within a little bit closer than 2 feet, but about 1 foot away, you're going to be totally fine.
Most of the time, in placing of acoustic panels, first of all, it's not nearly as exact a science as people want it to be. There's like, I want to know exactly where to put it on my wall in order to make sure that it's exactly going to give me the best. No, just throw them up there. Doesn't make any difference. And most of the time, what looks good is good is close enough. Like
pretty close.
If you get it too close to the speaker, you're like, I don't know, it looks a little close. If it looks a little close, move it to the side.
Yeah, like visually, you have the width of the speaker grill. So if you have that same width to the left and right of blank space and then a panel, it looks about right.
Yeah.
And the width of that speaker grill is going to be about 8 inches or so. So pretty much exactly what Tom landed on.
I swear, especially in acoustic panels, they're like, well, how many should I put up? How many can you put up? Well, I don't know, but maybe 17. 17 is the right number then. That's how many you should put up. Well,
think as you can.
Should I do more? Can you do more? No. Well, then no. You shouldn't do more. That's what it comes down to. So he sort of regrets not having built a second row seating riser. He sort of regrets having built his second row seating riser directly into the design of the room, which is what I tell people not to do all the time. But let's go on. He means he can't. This means he cannot move his front row, which is his main row, back any farther. He thinks he might want to, since his front row is closer to the front wall, 10 feet, than the back wall, 12.5 feet. This positioning also means the front row is closer to the top front speakers than the top rear speakers, and it's what's bugging him a bit. He feels like he wants to increase the trim level of his top rear speakers. They sound quieter than the top fronts when he's in his primary seat. Do we think it would be okay to just boost the top rears and run them a bit hot so that it gets the best experience in his primary seat? Or is that going to mess up things for a second row seats too much? No one cares about that second row. You shouldn't. Honestly, we say this all the time, but I say it constantly. Measure for the area that you're going to be sitting in, not necessarily the seat that you'll be in, unless you're sitting dead center. But like if you're on the couch, right? Like on my couch, I don't always sit dead center, right? I sit a little bit off to one side. I do not measure from that where my butt actually is in the seat. I measure
seat number 1 where all the trim levels get set off of that location.
So if you do that, if you're just like dead center on the couch, that on the front row, right in front of the center channel, that's where it's your dead center is. Then at that point, that's where you measure. Then it will level match your top speakers for that spot, and that's what you should have done to begin with. If you didn't do that, that's fine. If you did do that, and you're like, oh, I think the top rears are too quiet, that's psychosomatic. That's psychoacoustic. That's not. That's you're just thinking that.
Still though.
Because
if you would just prefer to make them a little louder, go ahead and do it.
It's exactly where I'm going with this. I like it does not matter. Like in my own theater, right? How many times have I advocated for getting rid of surround backs? Like all the time. And I have surround backs sitting back there, and I've got surrounds on my side. And when I disconnected them, I'm like, am I missing something? I don't know. I don't know. I might be missing something. I should probably do something about that. And what did I do? I hooked them back up. I hooked them back up just because they were back there. It made me feel better as a person.
Do
I think they're making a substantive surround sound experience better? Do I think that they're actually making a difference? The answer is no, I do not. Logically, but like emotionally, I'm like, I just feel better knowing that they're hooked up back there.
Sure.
So, first of all, if you did not measure the way that I said from the front row, do that again.
He might have measured with microphone position 1. He might have chosen what is actually our advice, which is the most equidistant spot. You know, so that front, left, and right are exactly equidistant, that you are centered between your 2 pairs of overhead speakers, which is probably like in between row 1 and row 2. Yes, technically speaking, that is the most correct way to do it. But of course it means once you physically sit closer to any given speaker, it is going to be louder than its partner speaker on the other side of the room that is now physically farther away from you. But look, nobody in your theater cares as much as you do about this experience.
Express to you how much that is true. You cannot understand.
If you're like, hey, I do some channel level tests and those top rears, technically they might be the same level, but to my human ears, which is valid because hearing behind you isn't as good as hearing in front of you, I want to boost them up a little bit so that to me it sounds perceptually like they're all equal. Then if I go and sit in the back row, I can notice that the top rear speakers are now louder than the top front speakers. Nobody else cares as much as you, and most people will just be like, oh, I actually noticed that their sound directly above me a little bit more now, and they'll probably enjoy it even more, honestly. So look, if you've got someone who's exactly as picky about this as you, and they sit in the back row and you sit in the front row, you're going to have to come to a compromise, but I think that's very unlikely, so by all means, tune it to taste.
Yeah. And again, if you're just like, I measured the way you said, but I still think that they sound too quiet behind me, turn them up. No one cares.
Yeah.
Turn them up. It's fine.
Same as boosting your center speaker a little bit, boosting your subwoofer a little bit.
Doesn't matter.
Go for it.
Yeah. Dan is pretty sure he wants to get the newest flagship 11.2 channel AV receiver from either Onkyo, Pioneer Elite, or Integra. So no Denon, no Marantz.
They are sister models across them, those brands.
So that would be the TX RZ70 for Onkyo, the VSX LX 805 from Pioneer Elite, and the DRX 8.4 from Integra. That's 2,800, 3,000, or 3,200 respectively. The prices are close enough that he doesn't care. He likes the looks of the front panel of the receiver the best. Sold. Get that one.
The Pioneer. That's the one he likes the best as far as just sheer looks of the front panel.
Is that the reason enough to go with that one? He just wants to make sure he's missing some crucial difference or feature that should make him pick up the Onkyo Integra instead. The back panels reveal some obvious port differences, but they're mostly similar in features. All 3 have 6 HDMI 2.1 inputs, 40 gigabits per second, and 3 HDMI 2.1 outputs, one of which is an independent zone 2. All have 11 channels of built-in amplification, and top out at 7.2.4 configuration. All 3 use Class AB amps. Pioneer Integra are rated 150 watts by 11. 2 channels driven. The Onkyo is rated 140 by 11. Some manner
Which it's probably the same amps, but they just slightly spec'd them differently.
Yeah, just so that you'll buy the other ones. All 3 offer dual independent distance and level subwoofer outputs, which doesn't make any difference to us personally, but maybe you care for that. Pioneer has 4 RCA plugs, but it's 2 internal Y splitters. There you go. And Integra has the same, but also has 2 XLR subwoofer jacks, which means nothing. Onkyo just has the 2 RCAs, which is fine. Pioneer gets XLR in and outs for front, left, and right. Pioneer adds XLR for center and 2 XLR subwoofers.
The Integra does, yeah. The Integra has the most XLRs.
Yeah.
The Onkyo has none. No XLRs on the Onkyo.
All 3 can only send 2-channel signals from source to zone 2. None of them can downmix a surround sound signal. Integra includes sub pre-outs. Okay. All 3 can only send analog 2-channel from source to zone 3. All 3 can steal surround back power to power zone 2. Pioneer and Integra can steal height 2 power to power zone 3. Pioneer, this is getting stupid. Pioneer has more trigger ports than the Onkyo, more, as if we need more than one. But whatever. The Integra has even more. Pioneer is not THX certified, so it doesn't have any of the THX listening modes, which I would never use anyways. Onkyo and Integra are both THX Select certified. All three come with Direct Live full bandwidth, and you can pay extra to add Direct Live bass control. Pioneer also has MCACC. Onkyo and Integra have AccuEQ. Which I would never use any of those, but whatever. Integra's web app gives a lot more IP control and diagnostic options, and it has more smart home support. Nothing in this list of crap that you just made me read has any indication that you care about any of this stuff. Okay, the way you buy a receiver is you look at the things you will do with it and buy the least expensive receiver that does those things. So far you've identified...
he was just trying to double check. I read through the manuals of all three. I did an exhaustive comparison on my own to be like, these are the differences. Tom just read through them all. You can go back and listen again if you need to. There could be scenarios where that Integra has a feature because of that web app, either a diagnostic or IP control or something, where I'd be like, that's the thing. That could be the thing. Or you're big into Zone 2 and Zone 3, but you really want to have bass management, so you also want to have a subwoofer output. Only the Integra has subwoofer pre-outs for Zone 2 and Zone 3. So it could be a small difference like that makes the difference here. But if that whole list we just talked about, you're like, nope. Don't care about any of those differences that we just mentioned. Then by all means, choose the Pioneer because you like it that looks at the best on the front panel.
Yeah. Aesthetics is a real concern of everything. And I am perfectly okay with somebody going, I wanted to buy a 2-channel amp. I really like the way the Macintosh amps look. Yeah. I bought a Macintosh amp.
Sure.
I like the VU meters on the front. I think they're cool. I spent the extra money. I'm fine with it.
Yep.
Okay, great. That's aesthetics. And I got no problems with aesthetics. They're certainly good enough amps. Mm-hmm. So you can certainly buy something a lot cheaper, but you decided to, because you liked it the way it looks.
You get one of those new, I think Summit Hi-Fi's own, or it might be the Tone Winner rebadge that it did, but they've got much less expensive amplifiers, stereo amplifiers, lots of watts, good power supplies built into those, and then they actually have like screens on the front. You can choose what type of VU meter you want in there. Way less expensive, and you can probably get the looks that you want.
Right. So the point here being, once you've identified that all the options that can do, like for me, once I've identified all the options that can do the things that I want it to do, and then I identify which is the cheapest price, that's the one I buy.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is what I just did with the TV, the C2.
Yeah.
You know, it did everything I needed to do. The things that the C3 does that the C2 can't do, I don't care about. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I bought the C2.
And then I also wanted to mention there was came out earlier, the RZ50 instead of the RZ70 from Onkyo, and the sister models to the RZ50 in the Pioneer Elite and Integra lineups. Also process a maximum of 11 speakers, but have only 9 amplifiers built in instead of having 11 amplifiers built in. But the other key difference there, so most of the time I'd be like, save the money, because it's like $1,000 less to get the RZ50 instead of the RZ70.
$60 on an amp for your surround backs.
That's right, absolutely. But
middles.
Aside from the number of built-in amplifiers, the RZ70 and its sister models, they have the dual independent subwoofer outputs, different trim and volume levels, whereas the RZ50 and its sister models, it's just a single internal Y splitter, no different distances and volume levels. That also means that the RZ70 and its sister models can do the Dirac Live bass control for an additional $500, whereas Dirac Live bass control isn't available for the RZ50 and its sister models. So that's the major differences between the 50 versus the 70. And that, you might go, I want to output mono subwoofer signals anyway, and I wasn't worried about Dirac Live bass control because I didn't want to pay an extra $500. Save $1,000, get the RZ50 or the Pioneer Elite version, which I think was the 705 instead of the 805, and then spend a tiny portion of the price difference on an external 2-channel amp to get you back up to 11 speakers. So that's another piece of advice I would have there.
Yes. And that's usually the direction that we would point you in. Dan is pretty sure he wants to get the... Wait, I scrolled up.
We're on Eddie now.
Sorry. Hold on. Then we're going to do this.
Okay.
And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to do that.
He must be putting in a link or something like that. I don't know what time.
Eddie, what would be the advantage of designing a speaker with low sensitivity? Because you're an amplifier manufacturer and you want to sell amps. That is the primary benefit as far as I can see. there was a time, and I'm going to read the rest of this question, but there was a time I feel like, you ended up with speakers with low sensitivity because that was, the components that you needed to get the sound signature you wanted, or the performance that you wanted, forced you into that low sensitivity thing. I think now we are at the point where there is really very little excuse in my mind as to why you have to have a low sensitivity. I think that, you can make the argument, oh, well, I wanted to use this driver and I wanted to use this tweeter and I wanted to use this, and when I put them all together, this is where I wanted to cross them over because of these reasons, and now my speakers are low sensitivity. Usually you can go, yeah, but I can't. But somebody who knows what the heck they're talking about with speaker design can go, yeah, but you could have used this driver, has almost identical performance, and won't force you to have a 3 ohm speaker at the same time. Anyways, let's go. We can obviously find different speakers with different sensitivities, and it isn't just a case of cheap speakers being lower and expensive speakers being higher. It's usually the other way around, to be honest.
Quite often, yes, yeah.
So why would a speaker designer choose to make a lower sensitivity speaker, and why would they choose to make a higher sensitivity speaker when it clearly isn't just about cost? What are the advantages and disadvantages on either side? Again, if you're an amp manufacturer, it makes sense to make a speaker that's a low sensitivity. It helps you sell it. There are driver designs like electrostatic speakers, which by design, you just can't make them have a high sensitivity. They don't work that way.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to make an electrostatic speaker, or speakers with ribbon tweeters sometimes and other things that are out there, the design of the driver forces you into that low sensitivity. The high sensitivity on the other side, you design a speaker that way so that it can play super loud with very little power. And that is got its advantages and disadvantages. Again, it all goes into like what the speaker is going to be used for, and why, and what drivers you chose to put in it.
Yeah.
Sometimes those two things are in linked, and sometimes it's just, I like to use aluminum dome tweeters. I'm comfortable using aluminum dome tweeters, so I'm going to use them, and I'm going to coat this one with diamonds and sell it for more. I mean, so it's a little bit, you don't really know where it lies. The other thing that you should also consider when you look at these speakers is there are definite trends when it comes to speaker designs. Things get hot. Folded ribbon tweeters were like, everybody was shoving them into everything for a while. Now they're not quite talked about nearly as much. The beryllium tweeters were hot for a while. The diamond tweeters were hot for a while.
Aluminum magnesium is on the rise these days. Yes.
So there's a little bit of everything that kind of goes on here. But yes, I think that it is more likely that an expensive speaker is going to have low sensitivity because it almost signals to the consumer, hey, not only is this a quality audiophile looking speaker and has these components that I know that you're looking for, but it's also low sensitivity, so you're going to have an amp.
Yes,
so
you need a kilowatt amp to get the most
out
of this.
So that AVRant guys will have to tell you that you have an amp, and every time the AVRant guys tell you that we have an amp, a devil earns its horns.
So, I mean, some of it is down to material choice. If you have cone materials that are stiffer and lighter, they will be more sensitive. But then you have how many windings in the voice coil are there? What material is the voice coil? Are you cooling it? Are you actively cooling it? What size is the magnet? What material is the magnet? So some of those design choices and availability and the price point that you're trying to hit and the physical size. Does this need to be a really narrow depth speaker? I'm going to have to choose a different magnet and voice coil design. Is this going to be a certain form factor that I'm aiming for? Am I putting drivers back to back and I want to have that force cancellation? So there's multiple things that can lead you as a speaker designer to choosing one material over another, one magnet size over another, all those types of things. Then how you connect them internally is going to have an impact of series and parallel and combinations if you have multiple drivers. Crossover design is going to throw a big part of this. Now, the end result is, if you look at the greatest number of the most common speakers, they all have pretty similar sensitivity.
Yeah.
Like 86 decibels, 1 watt, 1 meter to 89 decibels, 1 watt, 1 meter.
Like the sweet spot where everything lives.
Like a huge number of speakers have that. To make it more sensitive than that, we typically start to see some physical design changes. Things being put into waveguides, things being put into horns, things getting compression designs, where we're using mechanical advantages to get more sound output and sound reinforcement from the same amount of wattage going in, because there isn't a limitless supply of materials that have different characteristics and weights that we can use. There isn't a limitless number of, different speaker design drives and magnets that we can choose from. So yeah, you start to run into, there actually is a pretty wide berth of very common sensitivity designs. Making it more sensitive than that is definitely a choice, and you start using mechanical properties to get there. Making it less is very easy. Making a speaker less sensitive is very easy because you just start wiring things in parallel instead of series, and you just start using heavier, cheaper materials instead of lighter, stiffer materials, and things like that. So cost is part of it, but then all of those material choices and size choices and things like that come into it too.
Yeah. He says he wants to get a 3-channel amp to power his front 3 speakers. His theater area is 14 by 19 with 8-foot ceilings, but it's open at the back on the right-hand side, so it's really not either of those things. He's one of those things. He sits 10 feet away from his front speakers, and he's using Musician Audio Night 1. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. Front,
left, and right bookshelf speakers rated at 86 dB sensitivity, 4 ohms, with a Wharfdale Evo 4.C.
Yeah, that's the name. Sorry.
Whatever. Center. Rated at 90 dB sensitive, 8 ohms compatible, minimum 4.3 ohms. What is a good amplifier for that setup that we recommend?
Yes.
He's... How far away is he sitting?
10
feet. You say?
10 feet.
I mean, you don't really need an amp.
It's unlikely you need an amplifier.
Don't really need an amp.
But there are power handling capabilities of both of those speakers if you want to essentially max out what those speakers are capable of doing, which is more wattage than an average AV receiver is going to be able to sustain. So there's potential for about 3 decibels greater headroom and output here if you add an external amplifier. Emotiva's BACCH A3, which costs $550 right now. It is almost a perfect spec match, including, he was a little bit concerned that one of his speakers is rated 8 ohms, the other speaker is rated at 4 ohms. If you take that into account and you look at the wattage output ratings from that Emotiva BACCH A3 into 4 ohms versus 8 ohms, it's like spot on for the power handling capabilities of your front 3 speakers. So there's really not a better match than that at anything that's like a substantially lower price or higher. That's the one.
You got me thinking about tweeters, so I just did a quick search on titanium tweeters because I don't think I've ever heard of titanium tweeters, but apparently they exist.
PSB, Axiom Audio, they all use titanium. Yeah,
I think that. Yeah, I mean, other than sounding harsh because they're titanium, very metallic sounding.
There are pluses and minuses to every material.
Jesus. John is thinking it might be finally safe to switch from his Harmony remote over to the newest Sofabaton X1S model, but he's got a couple questions about it. Ask Andrew.
True.
They don't seem to sell additional IR blaster units. How can he buy additional IR blasters for it, or can he just use the Harmony IR blasters? I think they're exactly the same.
Well, physically not quite, because the Harmony IR blasters have on them a 2.5 millimeter plug connection, which is a little bit smaller. The plugs on the hub for the Sofabaton X1S are 3.5 millimeter. So you can simply get a 2.5 millimeter in to 3.5 millimeter out little adapter, and you can use the Harmony IR blasters with the Sofabaton X1S hub that way. You do want to make sure when you get the adapter or any third-party IR blaster, because they can function. I mean, there's no like chip inside of these things. It's just a straight signal that's going through. But what throws some people sometimes is the X1S, the 3.5 millimeter jack, it is a TS or a tip sleeve connection. That means that if you look at that little 3.5 millimeter jack, there is a silver tip, there is a single black ring, and then there is silver from there to the barrel. And you will find some adapters and IR blaster extension cables that are TRS or tip ring sleeve. That means it's the silver tip, a black band, another silver band, another second black band, and then silver from there to the black plastic jack that you plug in there. So there's like those 2 black bands instead of only one on a tip ring sleeve. There's also TRRS, tip ring sleeve, that have 3 little black bands. You don't want the TRS or the TRRS. You only want the tip sleeve, a single black band. So that's why some people in like Amazon reviews are like, I tried this and it didn't work. It's like, yeah, you got a tip ring sleeve and you needed a tip sleeve. So that you have to be careful about. But other than that, you can use basically anything, any third-party IR blaster extender, as long as it's got a 3.5 millimeter tip sleeve connection.
So it looks as though the Sofabaton X1S supports Bluetooth and Wi-Fi control for many devices, which would mean IR signals aren't needed for all of those devices, right? Technically.
This is true.
He's got an older Yamaha Avantage receiver, Oppo 205, DirecTV satellite DVR, Apple TV 4K, Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K, and Sony X900F TV. How many of those can he control without IR? And are there any issues using a combination of Bluetooth for some and IR for others? First of all, the general experience with using IR and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi all together is fairly seamless for all these remotes. The Harmony remote was the same way. It just, you press a button and whatever. I will tell you that the LG took over like a ton of buttons on my remote and my Harmony remote, and I had to go back and try to figure out what the heck was going on, because I was press a button and like go to a screen I didn't want to go to. So I ended up plugging my I haven't used my Harmony remote with my computer ever, my laptop computer, I think ever. So I went to plug it in. I went to find like the Harmony Logitech whatever app, and it wasn't on my computer. I was like, So I plugged the Harmony remote into the computer, went to the thing and downloaded the app, and then it asked me if I wanted to sign in or just use the settings from the remote itself. I was like, give me the remote settings. So the remote was plugged in. It just transferred everything over. I made changes. It backed it back out over there. Perfect.
Good.
Worked just fine. I will tell you, though, if you just put OLED in there, LG in the OLED, it won't find your TV. You have to put the actual model number in there.
That would help.
Which it did find. So
all of that is an aside, because we're not even talking about already. You're talking about Sofabaton. But yeah, 3 out of the devices that you talked about will use Bluetooth instead, and I would absolutely recommend that anything that you can use the Bluetooth control from the Sofabatons, use that instead of the IR. Works really nicely. So your Apple TV 4K, your Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K, and your DirecTV satellite box should all work with a Bluetooth remote connection. The other ones will be IR. No problem using them together.
Yes. There you go. With all the concerns about TikTok and other apps that might be compelled to share user data with the Chinese government, is that a potential concern with Sofabaton? I mean, it's a potential concern with everybody, and they're not just sharing your data with China; they're sharing it with them. They'll sell it to the highest bidder, and that has to do with every single thing.
We don't know that for a fact. We don't know it. I don't know exactly.
We have no idea about Sofabaton. I'm talking about in general. Every app. You know, like people are like, oh, you know, they're so worried about TikTok as if TikTok is somehow the worst of the bunch. It's not. It's not even close. You know, I mean, look at what Google and Facebook and everybody else does to you. I mean, I'm literally, and I see people talking about this all the time. It's a little bit of kind of like you hear a new word and then you notice somebody saying it within 24 hours. People start talking about something, they're like, I just got ads for it. I think my phone's listening to me. First of all, your phone is listening to you.
Well, it's that anything you search for on any device, as soon as you connect to a different Wi-Fi, it's now in that part of the system, and it'll show up on other people's computers that are connected to the same Wi-Fi, and yes, that's how that works.
Yeah. So I mean, is there a concern? I don't know.
I mean, I certainly can't guarantee that Sofabaton, which is a Chinese company based in Hong Kong, I certainly can't give you any sort of guarantee that they're not sharing user data with the Chinese government. They absolutely might be. That's entirely possible. I also can't confirm that they are for sure, or sharing it with anybody else. I don't know the answer to that. That's about it. I
mean, you're going to have to go live off the grid, and even then, they have satellites. I mean, honestly, we can't. I'm not saying that you shouldn't worry about your data or whatever, and you shouldn't be at least a little careful about it, but worrying about one specific device, you know, when you're actually asking us about it on another device that you already know is doing it, You know, through whatever apps you have on there.
I do like the idea of any device, any home theater device that I'm registering. When you need to register or need to create an account in order to use it, I like to just create a new email address for doing that. Not the least of which is if there are any settings that are tied to the email account, if I want to sell that device, I can give the email account away too. So I do like to do that.
We talked about that on this podcast, and I wrote an article on AV Gadgets talking about how to do that for your Odyssey Multi-QX.
That's right.
Dazz. Mostly some clarifications from Dazz this week regarding his living room setup. And there's some pictures.
There are. Just to remind us.
First up, he says he does have the tools already for hanging the TV himself on a stone fireplace, and Aaron, the fellow who's been sending Rob movie codes almost every week, reached out to say he has been professionally installing TVs for over 25 years now as part of his business, AC Customs. He offered to walk Dazz through any questions he might have over the phone, so hopefully that works out nicely. Great. Hooray. That's how I would do it. Most of us can do most things ourselves, right? Sure. Like if you had to change, like if you had to take the tire off of your car, like not just the wheel, but take the tire off of the rim and then put a different one on there, I believe you could do it.
Okay.
I don't believe you would try. I believe you would take it someplace because they could do it in 5 minutes and you'll spend 2 days doing it.
Yes, given enough time and effort.
Yeah, they have all the right tools and everything else. I believe you could do it.
Sure.
Okay? But sometimes what we need is just somebody to tell us some of the pitfalls and to also just reassure us that our plan isn't absolutely going to ruin something.
Do it this
which
way,
is what
not
I would
that
be
way.
worried
That
about.
might be all the guidance that Dazz needs.
So regarding potential subwoofer replacement, the sofa that is facing the fireplace and TV is right against the back, is right back against the wall behind it. That was hard to read. Part of that wall could actually be removed since it's just covering the area under the stairs and it's hollow. They've checked, but they weren't really planning on doing any more demo and construction at this point.
Yeah.
So the most likely option is to remove the tall sofa table that is behind the sideways facing couch on the right wall. Good luck figuring this out, people. I'm reading. I don't know idea.
We've got an image up on YouTube, and you could also see the image in static form at the Flickr album if you need to.
Or to replace that sofa table with another one that isn't as wide, that would open up some space to the right rear corner, so that's almost certainly where a sub will go in this room. He already went ahead and ordered a pair of HSU's new VTF TN1 subs to replace his pair of SB 2000s in his basement home theater. He's been wanting to upgrade those for quite a while now. So he could move his pair of SB 2000 upstairs, maybe stack them in that right rear corner, or should he sell them and get a single cylinder sub to go behind that sideways facing couch? I'd stack those bad boys and call it a day. Okay. I'd be done. I mean, I'm not saying they're big enough for this room. They're not.
They are not. Yeah.
But who cares? You're not looking for pressurization. You're looking for, I can hear bass.
Yeah.
And that's where you will be. So I would stack them and call it a day. I would absolutely do that.
I generally agree with that. That's certainly the least amount of effort solution to this.
And cost.
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, could you, if you are looking for even more output and even deeper extension than a pair of stacked SB2000s can deliver? Well, yes, I think that answers itself. You can achieve that by selling that pair and getting a single up-to-date cylinder sub. Yes, you can get greater output, particularly in the lowest octaves of bass from the ported design of a cylinder sub. But in terms of, could you just stack a pair of SB2000s in that right rear corner and improve upon the little 8-inch Pioneer Andrew Jones subwoofer that you're using right now? You absolutely will. You will hear that difference with a pair of stacked SB2000s. So effort-wise, I'd go for that for sure.
Yeah. He liked Rob's suggestion to get a pair of the larger HSU HC1 Mark II horn-loaded speakers. He says he always forgets that using them vertically is an option, but what about the HSU CCB8? They're not much more expensive, $390 versus $350 each, and he's really just asking out of curiosity to make sure he's covered all of his bases.
I'm thinking just because aesthetics were a concern, I don't know that you want the stouter and, not drastically deeper, but...
Yeah, they look a little bit like itty-bitty subwoofers. It
is an 8-inch driver in there. They're not small. They're not svelte at all. And I think if you mounted them on either side of that fireplace TV, they'd look a little weird. They'd look a little squat, and they'd stick out from the wall a bit farther. So I just think that the HC1s vertically will aesthetically look nicer because you've got that kind of like narrow wall space between the window and the fireplace brick. So that's what I would do.
Robert and his wife will be moving in the near future. There's a den that they've agreed will become the new home theater. The dimensions are 14 by 15.5 by 10. but due to where the windows and doors are positioned, the most obvious place to put his 83-inch OLED is on one of the longer walls. Okay. Which would make the theater wider than it is long.
Not by that much, though. A foot and a half wider than it is long. Yeah.
So is that suboptimal for the audio? He's under the impression that it's better for the sound if the room is longer than it is wide, but is that actually true? I mean, not technically, but sound doesn't care.
Yeah.
If it's wider or long or deeper or wider or longer or whatever it thinks, it cares that the dimensions aren't equal. But even if you're using dual subs and you position them properly, then even that isn't really an issue. And that's what I was about to say. If you get dual subwoofers, the biggest problem is the bass. Number one, biggest problem is the bass. If you're worried about bass, get dual subwoofers and no longer worry about bass.
Which I'm pretty sure he said he already has. A 7.2 is going to be coming up. And then when your room is wider than it is long, sometimes that makes it easier to put your two subwoofers at the midpoints of your two side walls because you just have that added width to your room. And sometimes that's very beneficial to be able to set things up that way.
So he wasn't following from that, his current Emotiva Pre-Pro is old enough that it does not do Atmos. It tops out at 7 speakers. He wasn't planning on changing a 7.2 speaker plus subwoofer setup in the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. What are our recommendations for 7 speaker placement and acoustic panel placement in a room that's wider than it is long? Remember what I said about how many can you fit? Mm-hmm. That's how many I think you should put in there. And I think spacing them in such a way that it aesthetically makes sense. Yeah. If you can get some bass trapping, if you can get some of those, square or triangular things to put in the corners or soffits or whatever, that's great. But as much as possible. As far as speaker placement, I mean, the Dolby guidelines, other than the fact that they have them all pointed directly at your stupid face, other than that, are all good, and you just look at the angles and try to figure that out. The biggest problem you're going to have is side surrounds. They're going to be further away from you than you're used to, and you're going to feel weird about it.
I don't know, it's still 7.5 feet. That's not that far.
Yeah, the reality is they're not going to be that far away.
No,
they're still going to be well within their operation.
Yeah, this isn't a gigantic room. Like if you were like, my room is 14 feet front to back, and it's 32 feet left to right, then it starts being a little bit more of I might have to think about this for a second. But when you're 14 feet front to back and 15.5 feet wide, like this isn't some enormous room and weird dimensions that are really going to be an issue here. Normally, like a lot of people are like, okay, I've got a spare bedroom. It's 14 feet by 10 feet. But I'm going to set it up wider than it is long. And what often happens there is your seat necessarily ends up quite close to the back wall behind it, and you really don't have room for surround backs. But I'm going to think in a room that's 14 feet front to back now, with an 83-inch TV mounted on one of the walls, that you're not going to be more than, 8.5, 9 feet away at the most. Maybe you're going to be as nice and close as 7.5 feet, eyes to screen. So you should have more than 4 feet of space behind your couch, as long as that's the way you're arranging the seats in this room, which is sufficient. You can still have surround backs there. So I don't see any issues whatsoever. Just follow Dolby's angle placement guidelines. And then, as far as acoustic treatment goes, bass traps, focus on that first. And you get the geometric advantage of putting them in corners or edges of the room, but it's not necessity that they must go there, but that certainly works very nicely. Focus on that first. That's your overall just broadband, no range limiting, doesn't have to be combo panels or anything, just full range bass traps, cover about 10% of the wall and perhaps ceiling surfaces, but honestly, wall surfaces with that. And then your front wall, you want to get rid of some of that boundary effect of, so right behind your front speakers. And then in this, probably the side walls at the first reflection points and the back wall right behind your heads, and you're done.
Yeah. Stan, every week we talk a bit about what we've watched, but what music do we listen to? What types of music do Rob and Tom listen to the most? Do we use physical media, or are we streaming only? Do we have any dedicated listening sessions, or is music just a background thing for us? And what's our preferred method for music discovery? Okay. I don't like talking about what music I listen to.
Okay.
I have not done it ever, to be honest with you.
Talked about it, you mean?
Yeah.
You have listened to music.
I listen to music, but I do not talk about my music preferences.
Sure.
I don't know why. Generally speaking, I listen to anything that's not country western, essentially.
Okay.
I don't listen to country music at all. I don't find it enjoyable. I don't really listen to jazz on purpose or classical on purpose. if it's on and somebody else is listening to it, I'm not like turn it off. Country music, I'll be like, listen, my man, we got to do something about this. It's not happening. If I feel like that's something I can do. Generally speaking, I do not sit in my theater and listen to music.
Right.
Ever. The exceptions would be some of the Blu-rays and discs I've gotten for testing purposes only. So when you see a review and I'm talking about music I've listened to, I got those things specifically to do reviews with, and they are no way indicative of what I actually listen to. Sometimes the music has been sent to me by manufacturers or distributors. A lot of times it's just something I saw on sale. I was like, oh, Diana Krall, everybody listens to that crap. Let's bring that in. I'll listen to her. And it's just great. I mean, it's great music quality and stuff. And that's what I'm listening to it for. As far as how I consume music, I listen to almost exclusively Pandora. Okay. And the reason I do that is because I cannot be bothered to make playlists.
Yeah.
I am not interested in it. But what I also do, and I do this quite a bit, is I want to okay. Many people came up with their musical tastes about middle school.
Sure.
They started listening to something in middle school, and as far as I can tell, for Gen X, they're still listening to Motley Crue. Like, they have not stopped. It's they listen to the same music they've listened to their entire lives. During my middle school and high school days, I had some really weird musical things happen to me. Okay. Not the least of which is my parents are huge Christians, which is fine. I was raised that way and everything. They're technically Catholic, but whatever, Christians. And I would occasionally go through these things where I would only listen to Christian music because that's what my parents wanted me to do. Mm-hmm. So I missed out on huge swaths of that time period where my musical tastes were solidified. So I did not really end up with any sort of musical taste that you would identify. Like there's a guy I know, he can sing every single song from that era. Like because he hasn't stopped listening to them for 30 years.
Sure.
He's listened to the same. I'm like, how do you know all these words? He goes, what do you mean? Doesn't everybody? I'm like, no. I mean, I know that song. I've heard it, but I haven't heard it in 20 years. Oh yeah, I listen to it all the time. I'm like, how can you still be listening to, Cypress Hill? It's been forever. So what I do two things. One, my musical tastes are all over the place as far as but when I consume through Pandora. I know it's not the highest quality, but I'm not going for high quality. I'm going for, I don't have to do anything. And a lot of times what I'll do is if my kids are interested in something, or if I see a band like, what was it? Some girl band I just saw, X something, XG. I don't know who they are. I think there might be Korean, but I'm not really sure. But I was like, okay, there's a song that keeps popping up all over the place on YouTube and everything else on the shorts, and I'm like, okay, who is this person? So I'll take that and I'll make a Pandora station based on them, just so I get a sense of what this new musical trend is. Yeah. Listen to it while I go, oh, this sucks. Or, oh, I actually kind of like some of this. And then I'll incorporate that into other playlists that I'm interested in. With my kids, if they're listening to something specific, I will make a playlist based on that so that I can understand what kind of music they're listening to, just to get a better sense of, what their influences are. With my 14-year-old, he plays everything over the Echo Dot, so I don't have to worry about him. I can hear it. I'm like, that's an awful lot of cursing for a 14-year-old. He's like, he just laughs and walks away. I'm not going to get with it. But yeah, so I do not have a specific way. I have done Spotify. I have done Tidal. I have done all of these things. And yes, I know they will create playlists for you. But I've done Pandora for so long that I'm very comfortable with it, and that's the one I use.
Okay. I don't listen to nearly as much music as I would honestly like to. Most of my sort of casual listening is podcasts. And I obviously could put more music listening into there, but I have a lot of podcasts on my list, and to try and keep up with them every week and not create a huge backlog, that's pretty much most of my listening. If I do dedicated listening, and I do sometimes, it's usually concerts. It's usually live concert recordings. And so that would be dedicated listening in my theater room, and typically on disc for that. I do want to get the absolute best audio quality I can for live concert recordings, so that's where I would do things that way. Otherwise, it's pretty much iTunes for me, or I guess, I don't know what's even called, because Apple Music is like the subscription service, and I don't subscribe to it, but I don't know, whatever. iTunes used to be that, whatever it's called now, that's my primary source for things that I'm listening to. I'll just name, like, probably my favorite artist is Brandi Carlile, so, that type of music is probably my favorite, but I listen to a fairly wide swath of different things. And music discovery, I don't discover as much music as I should. I'm way out of touch these days. I have no idea what's going on. So I've just reached that point, and there's some things I just don't have the time available to dedicate to. Not that I wouldn't like to, but music for me, strangely enough, is one of those things. I also tend to listen to quite a few movie original soundtracks because I love movies. I like to pay attention to the score. So I'm not just talking about the licensed songs that would play in there. I'm talking about the actual original soundtracks, most of which are honestly easiest to find either through iTunes, because many of them are sold there, or just on YouTube is where you can find the original soundtracks for a lot of movie scores. So I like to do that because it's very nice to me to be able to isolate that, to have the dialogue and sound effects removed, and just be able to hear those songs. So I'm definitely on a kick with Loki's soundtrack. I love that original soundtrack. It's fantastic music in there. The Witcher's soundtrack. Those types of things are to my liking.
So he's found our comments about studio recordings versus live venue recordings and how they might impact the way you acoustically treat your room. Very interesting. His room is 400 feet square with a flat 8-foot ceiling. He listens to a lot of classical music that was recorded live in the auditorium. He noticed how much greater the dynamic range is compared to most studio recordings, and he likes to listen loud to better recreate the actual concert experience. If we were starting from scratch, how would our recommendations for speakers, amps, preamps, acoustic treatments, etc. be different for his usage versus someone who mostly listens to studio recordings? And also, how would it be different for a dedicated 2-channel setup versus a surround sound system that would also be used for movies? Finally, would our recommended application of room correction be any different for live music versus studio recordings, 2-channel versus surround, and music versus movies? Okay, I'm sure Rob's going to have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm just going to tell you that my thought consistently and will forever be the speakers in the room should not color the sound, color what you're experiencing. So if the recording was made in an auditorium with a high dynamic range, all of the aspects of that room are in the recording. So if your room does something to the sound before it gets to your ears, you are no longer hearing the recording as it was recorded. You are hearing the recording as it was recorded and then modified by your room. It's like adding EQ to something. So my recommendations for music speakers, for room treatments, for everything else is make it so that your speakers do as little to the sound other than recreate it. Do to your room what you can do to make the room make as little difference to the sound other than just keep it inside. So for the bass, for the most part. And that's it. So my recommendations for these different things for his usage versus somebody who's just listening to, Skrillex, for all I know, is exactly the same. You want the room to not make a difference in the sound. You want the speakers to recreate the sound without coloring it. It doesn't make any difference if you're listening to a live recording or a studio recording or or classical music or that really terrible country music crap that people seem to like to listen to. So that's my general feeling. No matter what your question is about, this is what I listen to. What should I do? My recommendation, if I had a slip of paper, I would write down the same thing and hand it to everybody exactly the same, no matter what their preface was for the question.
Yeah. For me, on a personal level, in terms of my own listening preferences, I essentially have no difference. I want speakers, amplifiers, preamplifiers that are appropriately sized with the appropriate output capabilities for my room size and listening distance. And I want to be able to, experience the entire range of the recorded signal, regardless of what type of source or recording it is. Now, There can be some exception here, which is that if this is really about trying to recreate live concert levels, those actually exceed movie reference volume, cinema movie reference volume. Because if you are, I'm not even talking about like the very front row, but like, a nice seat in front of the stage of a live rock concert, you're going to be getting hit with 120 decibel peaks, not 105 decibel peaks like we would have in cinema reference level. So I could quite easily, for someone who's like, yeah, what I'm trying to recreate is a nice close row seat at a symphonic orchestra presentation, and I want to be able to genuinely recreate those 120 decibel peaks that are in some live recordings, then I might need to look at more efficient speakers, higher wattage amplifiers than I would to calculate and reach cinema reference volume. So there's a legitimate difference that could be had there. In terms of the acoustic treatment of the room, like, I certainly respect what Dr. Floyd Toole has written about, particularly in regard to studio recordings and that whole thing I've talked about of, if you've got the studio recording that contains no information about the venue where the recording was made, it's just close mic'd, vocal booths, all those types of things, then the notion behind that is that I am bringing those instruments and performers into my room. And therefore, if I'm looking at the walls of my room, I know the size, I know the materials, it is a bit disconcerting if the sound either has very few vocal or audio cues to tell you about the room audibly, or it's like an actual mismatch, right? Like it sounds like this room is a whole lot bigger than my eyes tell me it is, and therefore people tend to prefer actually keeping their first reflections on the side walls and the ceiling, as opposed to absorbing them like we would typically do for a movie or a live concert type of acoustic treatment. I respect that, I understand it, but I also tend to side more with what Kevin Vakes from Revel Speakers has said about it, which is that he thinks it is more room dependent, and that basically the smaller your room is and the closer your walls are, and therefore the stronger those first reflections are, the more he wants to mitigate them. And I, in my experience, agree with that. If I have a really large, wide room, I'm not that concerned about absorbing the first reflections anymore, because they're naturally weaker just by virtue of distance. Whereas if I'm in a pretty small, flat-walled room, even for studio recordings, I like to absorb those first reflections a bit. So a subtle difference as far as acoustic treatment, but mostly the same. For what you're talking about, primarily caring about classical music that was recorded live, I would have the exact same acoustic treatment and speaker and amplifier advice for those types of recordings as I would for movies, because it's the same experience. You're trying to teleport yourself virtually to where it was recorded, not bring everything into your room. So I would quite heavily acoustically treat my room. I would probably mitigate the first reflections, and I would want speakers that can play the full range and get as loud as I want them to be.
Yes, everything I said. So that's it. That's all we're doing.
Of course.
Who's left?
We have on our list here James, which is a shame because those had some lovely pictures that I would like to share. But next week, James will be up first. Brian, who also has a couple of diagrams. John T. from the UK, and Ryan. So you folks will be up first next week.
We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Anand for sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 133 patrons over at patreon.com, including Kris. Thank you very much.
That is right. Anand, thank you very much for your PayPal donation. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you'd like to do that. So big thanks to our 133 patrons over there. Kris, thank you for being one of them.
We thank Aaron for sending a movie code for Rob to check.
Thank you, Aaron.
Greg for... it didn't come during the podcast. At least maybe they did not.
That we didn't notice.
Greg sending a Fosse amplifier maybe to me. Hopefully
that would be
today.
Very nice. Thank you, Greg.
And Ryan for sending a Movies Anywhere code that Rob's hoarding.
Yes, for now. I will forward that to Tom.
We also want to thank those who send us notes of thanks for keeping the podcast continuing over 900 episodes now. Jay, Aaron, Dan, Ezzy, Eddie, Dazz, Nathan, Robert, Stan, Brian, John, and Ryan. Thank you for thanking us.
And I'll say the names one more time. Jay, Aaron, Dan, Eddie, Dazz, Nathan, Robert, Stan, Brian, John, and Ryan. Thank you very much for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. We definitely appreciate it. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. I'm tired. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.